The moment Damien Laurent laughed at the trembling waitress in front of Chicago's most powerful investors, he had no idea he'd just humiliated the one woman who could destroy his entire empire. What happens when a cold-hearted billionaire mistakes quiet strength for weakness? When the shy woman serving his table turns out to hold secrets worth more than his fortune? This is a story about arrogance, hidden power, and the dangerous game that begins when you underestimate the wrong person. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what starts as cruel mockery becomes something nobody saw coming. The reservation book at Aurelius called it the Laurent table. Not because Damien Laurent owned the restaurant, but because power had a way of claiming territory without paperwork. Every first Thursday of the month, the corner booth with the bronze-tinted privacy glass became his, and the staff knew better than to seat anyone else there, even if he ran late. Tonight, he was running late. Damien's black Aston Martin carved through Chicago's early March snow like a knife through silk, expensive and utterly indifferent to the weather that made everyone else crawl. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. His assistant, Marcus, had called 4 times in the past 20 minutes. His lawyer had sent 3 emails marked urgent, and his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, had texted him a string of sad face emojis from her iPad because he'd missed another bedtime story. He silenced all of it. Tonight mattered more than hurt feelings or contractual anxieties. Tonight, Victor Ashford, the British investor who could greenlight or obliterate Damien's biggest acquisition, was flying in specifically to meet him. The deal was worth $2.3 billion, the kind of number that changed legacies, that turned millionaires into footnotes and billionaires into empires. Damien Laurent didn't do footnotes. He handed his keys to the valet without looking at him, straightened his Tom Ford suit, and pushed through the restaurant's heavy glass doors into warmth and soft jazz, and the low murmur of Chicago's wealthiest pretending they weren't constantly performing for each other. The hostess, a tall brunette whose name he'd never bothered learning, smiled too brightly. "Mr. Laurent, your guest arrived 10 minutes ago." Damien didn't apologize. Men like him didn't apologize for making people wait. "Take me to him." Victor Ashford sat alone at the corner table, a silver-haired man in his late 50s wearing a Savile Row suit and the kind of quiet arrogance that came from inherited wealth spanning centuries. Old money, the type that looked down on American billionaires the way art collectors looked at clever forgeries. Technically impressive but lacking soul. Damien, Victor's handshake was firm but brief, the social equivalent of a warning shot. "You're late." Traffic. Damien slid into the booth across from him, not bothering with excuses that sounded like excuses. "Let's talk about the Moreau acquisition." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's eat first. I find negotiations go smoother when both parties aren't distracted by hunger." Translation: "I'm going to make you wait because I can." Damien gritted his teeth behind a practiced smile and flagged down the nearest server. She appeared so quietly, he almost didn't notice her. A small woman, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled into a simple bun and eyes that seemed determined to look anywhere except directly at him. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her apron. Black uniform, white shirt, the kind of invisible armor worn by people who'd learned that being noticed usually meant being hurt. "Good evening," she said softly, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent Damien couldn't immediately place. "European, maybe? Eastern? Can I start you with drinks?" Victor ordered an obscure French wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Damien ordered scotch, neat, expensive, unmemorable. The waitress wrote it down with careful precision, her pen moving across the notepad like she was afraid of making mistakes. When she turned to leave, Victor stopped her. "Excuse me, miss." His tone was polite, but there was something predatory underneath it, the way cats sound pleasant right before they pounce. "That accent. Where are you from?" She froze. Just for a second, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. Damien was watching closely now, mostly because Victor's sudden interest irritated him. They were here to talk business, not interview the help. "Europe," she said quietly. "Sir?" "Yes, obviously Europe." Victor's smile sharpened. "But where in Europe? I spent 20 years in Brussels. I'm quite good with accents." Her fingers tightened around the notepad. "It's complicated. I moved around a lot as a child." Ah. Victor leaned back, losing interest as quickly as he'd found it. Well, the wine, please. We're quite thirsty. She nodded and disappeared toward the bar with the kind of speed that suggested relief. Damien watched her go, then forced his attention back to Victor. About the Moreau collection. Tell me, Damien. Victor's interruption was casual, but calculated. What do you actually know about art? The question landed like an insult wrapped in curiosity. Damien kept his expression neutral. I know the Moreau collection is worth $1.8 billion. I know acquiring it gives my firm controlling interest in 3 European markets. I know... You know prices. Victor swirled his water glass. But do you know value? There's a difference. Before Damien could respond, the waitress returned with their drinks, setting them down with the kind of careful silence that made her practically invisible. She was good at that, Damien noticed. Being there without being there. Victor lifted his wine, examined it against the light, then took a slow sip. His expression soured immediately. This isn't what I ordered. The waitress's face went pale. I'm sorry, sir. Let me check with... I ordered a 2009 Chateau Margaux. Victor's voice stayed pleasant, but his eyes went cold. This is a 2011. Completely different profile. I assumed a restaurant of this caliber would know the difference. I apologize. Her voice dropped even quieter. I'll bring the correct bottle immediately. No need, Victor waved dismissively. I'll have scotch instead. Apparently wine is too complicated for this evening. Damien saw the embarrassment flash across her face, quick, painful, human, and something ugly stirred in his chest. Not sympathy. Something meaner. The kind of cruelty that came from spending too many years watching people scramble to please him, from too many nights alone in a penthouse apartment that felt more like a museum than a home, from too many mornings waking up to his daughter's nanny instead of being there himself. He was tired. He was irritated, and Victor's condescending bullshit was making this entire evening feel like a waste of time. So when the waitress turned to leave, Damien let the cruelty slip out. Quick question. His voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise loud enough that nearby tables glanced over. Do they not teach you how to read wine labels wherever you're from? Or is the accent because English isn't really your first language? The restaurant didn't go completely silent. That only happened in movies. But their section got noticeably quieter. Heads turned, conversations paused. The waitress stopped walking. Slowly, she turned back to face him. Up close, Damien realized her eyes were gray. Not blue, not green, actually gray, like winter sky before snow. And for the first time since approaching their table, she looked directly at him. My English, she said quietly, is fine. Her accent suddenly sounded more pronounced. Not because it got thicker, but because Damien was actually listening now and he realized he'd been wrong about where she was from. Not Eastern European, not Scandinavian, French. Victor sat up straighter, his boredom vanishing. Then maybe, Damien continued, unable to stop himself now that he'd started, you should focus on getting orders right instead of approcher et ou in. Le vin que vous avez demandé n'existe pas dans notre cave, the waitress said, her voice still soft but suddenly crystalline. J'ai apporté le millésime le plus proche disponible, car un homme de votre prétendue sophistication devrait savoir que le Château Margaux 2009 est pratiquement impossible à trouver en dehors des collections privées. The French flowed out of her like water from a locked dam finally breaking, flawless, fluid, academic. Not the French of tourists or casual speakers, the French of someone who'd studied literature, who'd grown up reading Voltaire and Proust, who'd probably forgotten more about wine than Damien would ever know. Victor's eyes went wide. Damien felt something cold drop into his stomach. The waitress held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make her point, short enough to avoid being fired, then switched back to English. The wine you requested doesn't exist in our cellar. I brought the closest vintage available because a man of your supposed sophistication should know that a 2009 Chateau Margaux is virtually impossible to find outside private collections. I apologize for assuming you'd appreciate the substitute rather than humiliating me in public for your guests' entertainment. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps quiet and deliberate, her shoulders straight, her hands no longer shaking. The nearby tables had definitely stopped talking now. Victor stared at Damien, then at the waitress's retreating figure, then back at Damien. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not polite, not practiced. Genuine. "Well," he said softly. "That was unexpected." Damien's jaw tightened. "She's out of line." "Is she?" Victor picked up his wine, the wrong wine, and took another sip, this time with obvious appreciation. "You insulted her accent. She explained in perfect academic French why you were wrong. I'd call that proportional." He paused. "Did you catch the Voltaire reference?" "What?" "Prétendue sophistication." "Supposed sophistication. It's a phrase from Candide. She wasn't just correcting you. She was quoting French Enlightenment literature while doing it." Victor's smile widened. "I haven't heard French that good since my daughter's graduation from the Sorbonne. That girl's educated, seriously educated." Damien felt heat crawl up his neck. "She's a waitress, so it appears." Victor leaned forward, suddenly interested in something beyond business and posturing. "But people don't speak like that by accident. That's years of study, private tutors, money." He glanced toward the bar where the waitress was deliberately avoiding looking at their table. "I wonder what she's doing here." "Who cares?" Damien tried to redirect. "About the Moreau acquisition? Actually, I care quite a bit." Victor pulled out his phone. "Because the Moreau collection authentication has been a nightmare. The previous owner's records are incomplete. Half the provenance documentation is missing. We've had 3 art historians quit because they couldn't verify the authenticity of the collection's centerpiece, a painting by an obscure 18th century artist named Isabelle Mercier. Very few people in the world are qualified to authenticate her work. Very, very few." He typed something into his phone, frowned, typed more. "There's one expert," Victor continued, "who's considered the absolute authority on Mercier, published the definitive academic text, discovered previously unknown pieces. Basically, the person you need if you want to prove a Mercier painting is real and not a very expensive forgery." He looked up. "But she disappeared from the academic world 2 years ago. Stopped publishing, stopped teaching, stopped responding to consultation requests. Nobody knows where she went." Damien's irritation was morphing into something else, something that felt uncomfortably like dread. "Why are you telling me this?" Victor's smile turned sharp. "Because your deal dies without that authentication. My investors won't touch an acquisition built on a potentially forged painting worth $400 million, which means you need to find the world's leading expert on Isabelle Mercier, convince her to come out of hiding, and pray she verifies the painting is real." He paused. "Her name is Evelyn Hart, European art historian, born in Luxembourg, fluent in 6 languages. Disappeared without explanation in early 2024. He turned his phone around. On the screen was a professional headshot from a university website. A woman with dark hair, gray eyes, and an uncomfortable smile that suggested she hated having her photograph taken. It was her, their waitress. The shy woman Damien had just humiliated in front of a crowded restaurant was the one person in the world who could save or destroy his entire empire. Victor saw the recognition on Damien's face and started laughing, quiet, delighted, cruel. "Oh," he said. "Oh, this is perfect." Damien didn't remember the rest of dinner, didn't remember what they ordered, what they ate, whether Victor said yes or no to the deal. His entire focus had narrowed to the small woman moving between tables with careful invisibility, the woman who was apparently a world-renowned art expert hiding in plain sight as a minimum-wage server. He watched her bring drinks to a couple celebrating their anniversary, watched her quietly correct a confused order at the bar, watched her smile politely when an older gentleman asked for more bread, that same uncomfortable smile from her university photo, the smile of someone who'd learned that being pleasant was safer than being honest. Victor was still talking, something about authentication timelines and investor expectations, but Damien barely heard him. "I need to speak with her," he said, interrupting whatever Victor was saying. "Good luck." Victor finished his scotch. Women who disappear from academic careers worth millions don't usually do it because they're hoping someone will find them. "I'll make it worth her while. Will you?" Victor's expression turned calculating. "Because from what I just witnessed, money isn't what she's running from. People don't hide by working for tips if they're motivated by wealth. They hide because they're running from something. Or someone." He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. Here's my advice, Damien. You have 72 hours to get me that authentication, or my investors walk and your $2.3 billion deal collapses. If that girl really is Evelyn Hart, and I'm 90% certain she is, then you need her more than she needs you, which means the arrogant billionaire routine you just pulled. He smiled. Probably not your best opening move. Victor dropped a business card on the table. Call me when you have something, or don't. Either way, I'm flying back to London tomorrow. Your clock is ticking. He left without paying. Men like Victor never paid. Damien sat alone in the booth, watching Evelyn, if that was really her name, clear plates from a nearby table. She moved with practiced efficiency, her movements small and contained, like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. He'd humiliated her, publicly, cruelly, and now he needed her help. The irony tasted worse than the overpriced scotch. Damien waited until her shift ended. It was past 11 when she finally emerged from the staff entrance, wearing a worn winter coat over her uniform, her hair still in that tight bun. She walked quickly, head down, hands shoved in her pockets, the posture of someone who'd learned that making eye contact with strangers at night invited trouble. Evelyn? She stopped, turned, saw him leaning against his Aston Martin under the streetlight. Her expression went carefully blank. That's not my name, she said quietly. Isn't it? Damien pushed off the car. Evelyn Hart, born in Luxembourg, Ph.D. in European art history from the Sorbonne, published author of The Hidden Works of Isabelle Mercier, Authentication and Analysis. Disappeared from academia in March 2024. He paused. Should I keep going, or would you prefer to drop the act? For a long moment, she just looked at him. The streetlight cast shadows across her face, making her gray eyes look darker. Harder. What do you want? No accent now. Pure, flat American English, the kind people learned when they wanted to blend in. I want to hire you. No. You haven't heard my offer. I don't need to. She started walking. Damien followed. I'll pay you whatever you want. Name your price. There isn't one. Everyone has a price. She stopped so suddenly he almost ran into her. When she turned, there was something in her expression that wasn't fear or shyness or any of the careful blankness she'd worn all evening. It was contempt. Is that what you think? Her voice stayed quiet, but there was steel underneath it now. That everyone can be bought? That money solves everything? That you can insult someone in public and then wave your wallet and make it go away? I'm sorry about what I said in there. No, you're not. She cut him off. You're sorry you need something from me. That's different. Damien felt his temper spike. Listen. No, you listen. She took a step closer, and Damien realized she was angrier than he'd thought. I left my entire life behind to get away from men exactly like you. Rich, arrogant, convinced that power means you can treat people however you want because money makes you untouchable. Her voice dropped even quieter. I would rather work double shifts waiting tables for the rest of my life than spend 1 minute helping you with whatever you think you need from me. It's about Isabelle Mercier. That stopped her. Just for a second, a tiny hesitation, barely visible, but Damien saw it. The Moreau collection, he continued quickly. There's a Mercier painting, possibly her masterwork, but the authentication is incomplete. The deal is worth billions, but it dies without verification, and you're the only person qualified to find someone else. There is no one else. You wrote the book, literally. Evelyn's laugh was short and bitter. Then your deal dies. My heart breaks. She started walking again. Desperation made Damien's voice sharper than he intended. What are you so afraid of? That someone might recognize you? That your old life might come back? He was guessing, throwing darts in the dark, but something about the way her shoulders tensed told him he'd hit close to something true. Whatever you're running from, I can protect you. She spun around. You have no idea what I'm running from. Then tell me. Why? So you can add it to your leverage? Figure out what buttons to push to manipulate me into doing what you want? She shook her head. I've spent 2 years building a life where I don't owe anyone anything. Where I'm not a bargaining chip or a commodity or a means to someone else's end. I'm not going back to that. Not for you, not for anyone. Snow had started falling again. Light, lazy flakes that caught in her hair and melted on her cheeks. She looked small and tired and utterly immovable. Damien played his last card. What if I told you the painting might be in danger? Evelyn went very still. The Moreau collection, Damien said carefully, is being stored in conditions that aren't ideal. Temperature fluctuations, humidity issues. The previous owner was more interested in investment than preservation. If the deal falls through, the collection gets sold off piecemeal to whoever bids highest. Private collectors. People who will lock it away in climate-controlled vaults and never let anyone see it again. He paused. But if the deal goes through, if my firm acquires it, I can guarantee it ends up in a museum, public access, proper conservation, the way it should be. It was partially true. His firm did have partnerships with museums, but mostly he was lying through his teeth, saying whatever he thought might work. Evelyn studied him with those winter gray eyes, and Damien had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through him. You're lying, she said finally. I'm not. You absolutely are. Your entire deal is about acquisition and resale. You don't care about museums or public access. You care about profit margins and ROI and impressing investors like Victor Ashford. Her voice stayed level. But you're right about one thing. Private collectors will lock those pieces away forever. And if there really is a Mercier in that collection... She trailed off, something conflicted crossing her face. Which painting? Damien pulled out his phone, found the file Victor had sent him, turned it around. The photo showed a portrait, a young woman in 18th century dress, her expression caught somewhere between melancholy and defiance. The painting was beautiful in that old, careful way, all muted colors and precise brushwork. Evelyn's breath caught. La femme oubliée, she whispered. The forgotten woman. I thought it was lost, destroyed during the war. Is it real? She didn't answer immediately, just stared at the photo with an expression Damien couldn't read. Longing, maybe, or grief. Finally, she looked up. I need to see it in person. Photos aren't enough. So you'll do it? I'll authenticate the painting, that's all. I don't work for you. I don't report to you. I verify whether it's real or fake. I provide documentation, and then I disappear again. We're not partners. We're not friends. This is a one-time consultation, and when it's done, you forget you ever found me. It wasn't the agreement Damien wanted, but it was the only one he was going to get. Fine. And I want $25 million. Damien blinked. For an authentication? No. For a foundation. Dedicated to supporting emerging artists and researchers who get overlooked by mainstream institutions. People who do important work but don't have the connections or the pedigree or the money to get noticed. Her voice hardened. You want my help? That's the price. Not for me. For them. 25 million was excessive, ridiculous. But Damien's deal was worth 2.3 billion, and losing it would cost him everything he'd spent 5 years building. Done. Evelyn's expression didn't change. In writing, legally binding, before I verify anything. Fine. And I control the foundation, completely. You don't get a board seat. You don't get naming rights. Your lawyers don't get oversight. It's mine. Agreed. She studied him for another long moment, then nodded once. The collection is where? Luxembourg. Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe. Or resignation. Of course it is, she said quietly. Is that a problem? Everything about this is a problem. She pulled her coat tighter. But if that painting is real, and if there's any chance of saving it from some oligarch's vault... She trailed off, then met his eyes. When do we leave? Tomorrow. I'll send a car. No, I'll meet you at the airport. Send me the details. She started to walk away, then paused. And Mr. Laurent, if you ever speak to me the way you did in that restaurant again, if you ever treat me like I'm beneath you, this deal is over. I don't care how much money you're losing. I don't care how important your empire is. Are we clear? Damien nodded. Crystal. She disappeared into the snowy night, leaving him alone under the streetlight with the uncomfortable realization that he'd just agreed to give a waitress complete control over $25 million and his entire professional future. His phone buzzed. Sophie's nanny. She's asking for you again. I know you're busy, but she cried herself to sleep. Damien stared at the message, feeling that familiar twist of guilt and frustration. He was trying to build something for Sophie, a legacy, security, The kind of generational wealth that meant she'd never have to worry about anything. But somehow, all the money in the world couldn't buy him the ability to read his daughter a bedtime story. He got in his car, turned the heat up, and drove toward his empty penthouse, trying not to think about the look on Evelyn's face when she'd called him out for lying. The worst part was, she'd been completely right. Correct. The flight to Luxembourg left at 6 a.m. Damien arrived at the private terminal at 5:30, carrying his leather briefcase and the contracts his lawyers had drawn up overnight. 25 pages of legal language that basically said, Evelyn Hart gets complete control of a foundation funded by Damien Laurent for exactly $25 million in exchange for authentication services rendered. His lawyers had been furious. His CFO had called it financial malpractice. His board would probably try to remove him if they found out. Damien signed it anyway. Evelyn was already there when he arrived, sitting in the corner of the private lounge with a worn backpack and a coffee that smelled cheap and airport terminal bitter. She'd changed out of her waitress uniform into jeans and a sweater that looked like it had been thrifted, her hair down for the first time, falling just past her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less guarded, or maybe just more tired. "Morning," Damien said. She nodded, not smiling. He handed her the contract. "Everything you asked for. Have your lawyer review it." "I don't have a lawyer." "Then I'll have mine explain." "I don't need an explanation. I can read." She flipped through the pages with the kind of speed that suggested she actually could read legal documents, her eyes scanning clauses and subclauses with practiced efficiency. "This is actually fair." "You sound surprised." "I am." She signed it without ceremony, then handed it back. "Now I'm legally obligated to help you. Congratulations." The flight was smooth and empty. Just them, the pilot, and enough space to avoid each other if they wanted to. They wanted to. Evelyn sat near the window, staring out at clouds and sunrise, her expression unreadable. Damien sat across the aisle, pretending to work on his laptop while actually watching her out of the corner of his eye. An hour into the flight, he broke the silence. "Why did you leave?" She didn't look at him. "Why did you become an asshole billionaire who treats service workers like garbage?" "Touché. I'm not interested in trading tragic backstories." She turned a page in the book she'd been reading, something dense and academic about art restoration. "You don't need to know why I left. You just need me to verify your painting." "Humor me." "Why?" "Because we're stuck on this plane for 7 more hours, and I'm curious." Curiosity isn't the same as giving a damn. Damien closed his laptop. "You're right. I was an asshole last night. I humiliated you because I was stressed and angry, and Victor was being condescending, and taking it out on you felt easier than dealing with my actual problems. It was cruel and unnecessary, and I'm sorry." Evelyn finally looked at him. "You're apologizing because you need something from me." "Partly." He met her eyes. "But also because my 6-year-old daughter asked me last week why I'm always mean to people, and I didn't have a good answer." That got her attention. "You have a daughter?" "Sophie, she's the only thing I've ever done right." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Her mother died 3 years ago, cancer. I've been raising her alone, and I'm terrible at it. I work too much. I'm never home. I buy her expensive things instead of spending time with her because time feels harder to give than money." He paused. "Last night, she cried herself to sleep because I missed another bedtime story. And this morning, I signed a contract giving away $25 million to a woman I humiliated, and somehow that felt easier than just being a better father." "Dabais más." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "about your wife." "Don't be. It wasn't a good marriage, but Sophie deserved better than what she got. Better than me." "You're here, aren't you? Trying to build something for her?" "I'm here," Damien said, "chasing a deal that'll make me richer and probably spend even less time with her. So I'm not sure that counts as being a good father." Evelyn turned back to the window. "My father," she said quietly, "was one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Old money, generational. The kind of wealth that comes with expectations and obligations and absolutely no room for deviation from the plan he'd laid out before I was even born." Her voice stayed level, but there was something brittle underneath. "I was supposed to marry who he chose." Study what he approved. Live where he decided. Be the daughter he wanted instead of the person I was. So you left. So I ran. She smiled, but it wasn't happy. Abandoned billions. Cut off all contact. Started over in a country where nobody knew my name, worked minimum wage, lived in a studio apartment with broken heating, and for the first time in my entire life, I was free. You don't sound free. No, she admitted. I sound like someone who's still running, because that's what I am. I'm terrified that someday my family will find me and drag me back to that life, that all the distance and anonymity and deliberate invisibility won't be enough. She looked at him. So when you ask why I left, that's why. Because I'd rather serve coffee and take orders from people who think I'm nobody than spend one more day being someone's chess piece. Damien absorbed that. For what it's worth, he said, I think you're brave. I think I'm a coward. She turned another page. Brave people stay and fight. I just ran away. Running away from a bad situation isn't cowardice, it's survival. Tell that to the research I abandoned, the students I left behind, the work that mattered. Her voice dropped. I was close to something important, a discovery about Mercier's later works that could have changed how we understood her entire artistic evolution. But I walked away because I was too scared to stay. What if you could finish it? She laughed bitterly. With what resources? What funding? What institutional support? I'm a waitress, Damien. I don't have access to private collections or university archives or conservation labs anymore. That life is gone. What if it wasn't? Damien leaned forward. That foundation you're creating, what if it funded your research? What if you used it to finish what you started? Evelyn stared at him. That's not what I asked for. But it's what you want, isn't it? For a moment he thought she might cry, but instead she just shook her head. It's too late. Why? Because going back to that work means risking exposure. Publishing means putting my name back out there. And if my father finds me, she trailed off. It's too dangerous. Then publish under a pseudonym. Anonymous research grants exist. Hell, I'll personally guarantee your protection if... Stop! Her voice cracked slightly. Just stop. You don't understand what you're offering. You can't protect me from my family. Nobody can. The plane hit turbulence and they both fell silent. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly in every direction, white and cold and infinite. They landed in Luxembourg just after 2 p.m. local time. A black Mercedes was waiting on the tarmac, driven by a silent man in a suit who didn't ask questions. They drove through countryside that looked like something from a postcard. Rolling hills, old forests, medieval towns perched on cliffsides. Evelyn watched it all, with an expression Damien couldn't read. Nostalgia? Dread? Both? I grew up about 30 kilometers from here, she said quietly. There's a chateau. 17th century. 30 rooms. Gardens designed by the same architect who did Versailles. She smiled without humor. I hated every inch of it. Will your family know you're here? Probably not. Luxembourg is small, but not that small. And the collection is housed in a private facility outside the city. We should be fine. Should be wasn't exactly reassuring, but Damien didn't push. The facility turned out to be a converted warehouse. Climate-controlled, heavily secured, the kind of place where billionaires stored things too valuable to display and too important to sell. Their credentials got them past 2 checkpoints and a security scan before they were finally escorted into a viewing room. The Mercier painting waited on an easel under perfect lighting. Evelyn stopped breathing. Damien had seen the photo, but in person, the painting was different, more vivid, more real. The woman in the portrait seemed to stare directly through them, her expression capturing something indefinable. Sadness, maybe, or resignation, or quiet rage. Mon Dieu, Evelyn whispered. She moved closer, pulled a magnifying loupe from her backpack, and began examining the canvas with the kind of focused intensity that made everything else disappear. Minutes passed, then an hour. She checked brushstrokes, analyzed pigment patterns, studied the aging of the varnish. Damien watched her work, fascinated despite himself. This was who she really was. Not the shy waitress, not the runaway heiress, but this, a scholar completely lost in her element, brilliant and focused and absolutely certain. Finally, she straightened. It's real, she said. Relief flooded through Damien. You're sure? I'm sure. But her voice sounded strange, distant. What's wrong? The signature. She pointed to the bottom right corner where a small, elegant IM was barely visible. Mercier signed her early works differently than her later ones. This signature places it in her mature period, probably 1770s. She paused. But there's something else. What? Evelyn pulled out her phone, typed something, frowned, typed more. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. This painting, she said slowly, was reported destroyed in 1789 during the French Revolution. Mercier's studio was ransacked. Most of her work was lost. But according to family records, my family records, La Femme Oubliée wasn't destroyed. It was hidden. Damien's relief started morphing into concern. Hidden where? By my ancestors. The painting was part of a collection they were protecting during the political chaos. They created false documentation claiming it was destroyed to keep it safe from looters and revolutionaries. She looked up. Which means this painting didn't just survive. It was deliberately preserved by my family for over 200 years. So your family owns it? Not legally. The ownership was transferred through shell companies and trusts to obscure the connection. But morally? Historically? She touched the frame gently. This painting exists because my ancestors risked everything to save it. Then why did they sell it? They didn't. My father would never... She stopped. Unless... Her face went pale. Unless what? Unless this isn't the only painting. She started pulling up files on her phone, her fingers moving frantically. If this is real, and if the authentication records are incomplete, and if the collection is being sold quickly without proper provenance, she found what she was looking for and went completely still. Oh no. Evelyn, what is it? She turned her phone around. On the screen was a list, dozens of paintings, all attributed to various 18th century artists, all with incomplete documentation, all part of the Moreau collection Damien was trying to acquire. Half of these, Evelyn said quietly, were hidden by my family during the Revolution. They've been kept in private storage for centuries, protected and preserved. They're culturally priceless, and someone just put them all up for sale without verification, which means... She trailed off, her expression horrified. The authentication isn't incomplete because of poor record keeping. It's incomplete because proving these paintings are real would reveal who actually owns them. And my father would never sell these. Never. Which means someone stole them from him. Damien's blood went cold. You're saying the entire collection is stolen? I'm saying you're about to spend $2.3 billion acquiring art that was taken illegally from one of the most powerful families in Europe. She met his eyes. And when my father finds out, and he will find out, he's going to come after everyone involved with lawyers and law enforcement and every resource he has, which includes me. We'll fix this. There's no fixing this. Her voice shook. The moment I authenticate these paintings, I create a paper trail that leads straight back to my family. They'll know I was here, they'll know I'm alive, and they'll never stop looking for me. She backed away from the painting like it might bite her. I can't do this. I'm sorry. I can't. Evelyn, you don't understand. Her composure finally cracked. My father didn't just want me to follow his plan. He needed me to. I'm the only heir, the only one who can continue the family legacy. When I left, I didn't just abandon money. I destroyed his entire vision for the future. He'll never forgive that. And if he finds me... She wrapped her arms around herself. I'd rather stay invisible forever than go back to being his prisoner. Damien's mind raced. The deal was collapsing. Victor's deadline was ticking down. And the woman he'd dragged halfway across the world was having a breakdown in a climate-controlled vault surrounded by stolen art. He should have been thinking about salvaging the acquisition, about legal strategies and damage control, and how to protect his empire. Instead, he was thinking about Sophie crying herself to sleep, about Evelyn's gray eyes when she'd talked about running away, about the cost of building something at the expense of everything that actually mattered. Then we don't authenticate it, he said. Evelyn looked up. What? We walk away. The deal dies. Victor's investors pull out. I lose $2.3 billion and probably my reputation. He shrugged. But you stay safe. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And weirdly, he was. You were right last night. I've spent so long chasing money and power that I forgot what I was building it for. Sophie doesn't need billions. She needs a father who doesn't treat people like commodities, who doesn't sacrifice everything good to get something bigger. He gestured at the painting. This deal isn't worth your freedom. It's not worth anything. Evelyn stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You'd really walk away? Yes. You're lying. I'm really not. She searched his face for a long moment, then looked back at the painting. La femme oubliée, the forgotten woman. There might be another way, she said quietly. Damien watched Evelyn circle the painting like a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. Her earlier panic had transformed into something sharper, the focused intensity of someone who'd just figured out the puzzle but wasn't sure they wanted to share the solution. What way? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone again, scrolling through files and photographs with increasing speed. Her lips moved silently, counting something only she could see. The provenance gap, she said finally. Every stolen painting has one. A period where ownership becomes murky, where documentation conveniently disappears or gets fabricated. For this collection, that gap is roughly 15 years, from 2009 to 2024. She looked up. But stolen art doesn't just vanish and reappear. Someone had to move it, store it, create false records. That someone left traces. You're saying we can track who stole it? I'm saying I might already know. Her voice went quiet. My father had a business partner, Alexander Moreau. They managed the family's art holdings together for decades. But 3 years ago, there was a falling out. Something about mismanaged funds and breach of trust. My father severed all ties and Alexander disappeared from Luxembourg's social circles completely. Damien felt pieces clicking together. Moreau, as in the Moreau collection. Exactly. Evelyn's hands were shaking slightly. Alexander must have taken the paintings when they split, created this entire acquisition scheme to liquidate assets he stole from my family. And because the art was never publicly documented, because my father kept it hidden for security reasons, there's no paper trail proving it was stolen. Except you. Except me. She wrapped her arms around herself. I grew up around these paintings. I studied them as a child. I know their history, their provenance, their significance. I could prove they belonged to my family with one authentication report, which would expose you, which would destroy everything I've built. She turned back to the portrait, and Damien saw something complicated cross her face. But letting Alexandra sell off 2 centuries of cultural preservation because I'm too scared to surface? That's not bravery either. The viewing room felt smaller suddenly, the climate control system humming in the silence between them. What if, Damien said carefully, we expose the theft without exposing you? That's impossible. Is it? You said yourself, people don't know you disappeared. What if we create documentation from an anonymous expert, hired through encrypted channels, paid through shell companies, no physical trail connecting you to the authentication? Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want me to ghostwrite my own professional opinion? I want to find a solution that doesn't force you to choose between doing the right thing and protecting yourself. He moved closer. You said running away felt like cowardice. This is your chance to fight back without putting yourself in the line of fire. It's fraud. It's justice with extra steps. It's legally questionable at best. So was stealing $100 million worth of art from your family. Damien pulled out his phone. I have lawyers who specialize in exactly this kind of gray area. We can structure it so the authentication comes from a legitimate but untraceable source. Victor gets his verification, the paintings get returned to their rightful owners, and you stay invisible. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Why are you helping me? The question landed harder than it should have. Damien thought about all the easy answers. Because he needed the deal, because it was good business, because protecting his investment made sense. But standing in that sterile room with stolen art and a woman who'd given up everything to be free, the truth came out simpler and more honest than he'd planned. Because my daughter asked me why I'm always mean to people, and I didn't have a good answer, he said. Because you called me out for treating you like you were invisible, and you were right. Because I've spent 3 years building an empire, and I can't remember the last time I did something that actually mattered. He paused. And because watching you walk away from your life's work, Because you're terrified of being found? That's not justice. That's just more cruelty wearing a different face. Evelyn's eyes went suspiciously bright. You're still an asshole, she said quietly. I know. But maybe a slightly less terrible one than I thought. Progress. She turned back to the painting, and when she spoke again, her voice was steadier. If we do this, if we go through with the anonymous authentication, there are conditions. Name them. First, the paintings go back to my family. All of them. Not sold, not auctioned, returned. However we structure the legal side, that's the end game. Agreed. Second, Alexandra Moreau faces consequences. Criminal charges, civil suits, whatever it takes. I don't care if he spends the rest of his life in prison or just gets publicly humiliated, but he doesn't walk away clean. I'll make sure of it. And third, she hesitated. The foundation we discussed, the $25 million. I want to expand its scope, not just emerging artists and researchers. I want to fund repatriation efforts, stolen art recovery, programs that help return cultural heritage to its rightful communities. Her voice strengthened. What Alexander did to my family, that happens to smaller institutions, indigenous communities, war-torn countries every single day. They don't have lawyers or resources or billionaire connections. If I'm going to risk exposure, it needs to mean something bigger than just fixing my family's problem. Damien did the math. Expanding the foundation's scope would cost more, require more infrastructure, more public presence. That'll make staying anonymous harder, he pointed out. I know. Evelyn met his eyes. But hiding forever isn't living. It's just surviving. And if the last 2 years taught me anything, it's that survival without purpose feels a lot like dying slowly. Something shifted in the room. Not quite trust, but something adjacent to it. An understanding between two people who'd both spent too long prioritizing the wrong things. Okay, Damien said. Let's burn Alexandra Moreau's world down. Evelyn's smile was small but genuine. Legally. Obviously legally. I'm serious. No billionaire vigilante nonsense. We do this properly. I'm wounded you'd think I'd do anything improper. You tried to bribe me in a parking lot at midnight. That was a legitimate job offer. You threw money at me until I said yes. That's called negotiation. She laughed. Actually laughed. And Damien realized it was the first time he'd heard her sound genuinely amused rather than bitter or scared or carefully polite. We should get started, she said, pulling out a laptop from her backpack that looked like it had survived several minor disasters. I'll need access to the full collection inventory, provenance records, and whatever authentication attempts have already been made. I'll have my team send everything. And I'll need a secure location to work. Somewhere off the grid. If we're doing this anonymously, I can't exactly set up in a Luxembourg hotel under my real name. Damien thought for a moment. There's a property about 40 minutes from here. Belonged to one of my wife's distant relatives. It's been sitting empty since she died. No staff, no security cameras, completely private. We could work from there. Something flickered across Evelyn's face. Your wife's family was from Luxembourg? Belgian, but they had property here. Why? Just connecting dots. She closed her laptop. Show me the property. If it works, we can start tonight. They left the vault with its perfect lighting and climate control, leaving the forgotten woman's portrait staring at the empty room. Outside, the afternoon sun was already sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Luxembourg countryside. The drive took them through villages that looked frozen in time, stone buildings, narrow streets, church spires, piercing gray sky. Evelyn watched it all with an expression Damien was learning to read, as complicated nostalgia mixed with dread. I used to bike through towns like this, she said quietly. When I was a teenager, my father hated it, said it was undignified for someone of my status to be seen pedaling through village squares like a common tourist. She smiled slightly. So naturally, I did it every chance I got. Rebellious even then. Not rebellious enough to actually leave until I was almost 30. Her smile faded. I kept thinking I could change things from inside, make him understand that I wanted something different, but men like my father don't compromise. They wait for you to see things their way, and when you don't, they just wait longer. What was the final straw? Evelyn was quiet for so long Damien thought she wasn't going to answer. then barely audible over the engine noise. He arranged my marriage to a man I'd never met. Gave me 6 months to warm to the idea before the formal announcement. Her voice stayed level, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. I left that night. Took nothing but my passport and the clothes I was wearing. Flew to New York and never looked back. Did he try to find you? For the first year, constantly. Private investigators, frozen bank accounts, legal threats. But I'd prepared. Hidden money, created false trails, learned how to disappear properly. She glanced at him. Turns out academic research skills translate pretty well to evading detection. And after the first year, he stopped, or seemed to, which is somehow worse than knowing he's actively looking. She turned back to the window. My father plays long games. He's patient. For all I know, he's just waiting for me to surface so he can swoop in and reclaim his wayward daughter. Make an example of me. Prove that nobody leaves the family. The property appeared around a curve. A small stone house perched on a hillside, surrounded by overgrown gardens and ancient trees. It looked romantic in a Gothic novel sort of way, all weathered beauty and elegant decay. Evelyn stared at it. This belonged to your wife's family. Her great-aunt or something. I honestly don't remember the exact connection. Why? Because I know this house. Her voice went strange. My father brought me here once, when I was maybe 12. He was meeting with someone. A Belgian art dealer, I think. I waited in the garden while they talked business inside. She pointed to a stone bench barely visible under wild roses. I sat right there for 3 hours reading Baudelaire and pretending I was anywhere else. Damien felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's probably just a coincidence. Probably. But she didn't sound convinced. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old wood and abandonment. Furniture sat under white sheets like sleeping ghosts. The kitchen still had dishes in the cupboard. Someone had left their life here and just never come back. Evelyn moved through the rooms with the careful attention of someone cataloging details. When she reached the study, she stopped. Damien. He found her standing in front of a wall covered in old photographs, family pictures, formal portraits, casual snapshots spanning decades. And there, in the corner, a photograph of a young couple at what looked like a gallery opening. The woman was Damien's wife, Maria. Younger, maybe mid-20s, smiling at the camera with that slightly uncomfortable expression she always wore at formal events. The man standing next to her was Alexandre Moreau. Small world, Damien said faintly. Too small. Evelyn pulled out her phone, photographed the picture. Your wife knew Alexander, which means she probably knew my family. Which means this house isn't random. It's connected. Connected how? I don't know yet. But nothing about this is coincidence anymore. She turned to face him. Did your wife ever mention the Moreau collection? Any art dealings with my family? No. She didn't. Damien trailed off, thinking. She didn't talk about her family much. Said they were old money and old grudges, and she was happier keeping distance. After she died, I inherited some properties, including this place, but I never really looked into the details. I was too busy with Sophie and work and grieving. Not really. The admission came out harder than intended. We weren't in love anymore. Maybe we never were. The marriage was strategic. Her family had connections I needed. I had money she wanted. We made it work until Sophie was born, and then we just coexisted. When she got sick, I paid for the best treatment, but I wasn't devastated when she died. I was relieved. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. That's honest, at least. It's terrible. It's human. She walked to the window, looked out at the overgrown garden. My parents had that kind of marriage, too. Arranged, strategic, completely devoid of actual affection. They stayed together because divorce would have been scandalous and expensive. They just lived separate lives in the same house and pretended everything was fine. She turned back. That's partly why I ran. I couldn't become them. Couldn't spend 50 years performing a marriage that meant nothing just to preserve appearances. Is that what he wanted for you? The arranged marriage? Exactly that. A merger disguised as romance. The man was from another old Luxembourg family. Good bloodlines, better portfolio. We would have produced acceptable heirs and hated each other quietly for decades. Her voice went sharp. and everyone would have congratulated my father on making such an excellent match. They stood in the dusty study, surrounded by evidence that their lives had been more connected than either of them realized. Outside, shadows lengthened across the garden where a 12-year-old Evelyn had once read French poetry while her father made deals she didn't understand. "We should set up the equipment," Evelyn said finally, breaking the silence. "If we're going to create an untraceable authentication, I need to work fast. Victor's deadline doesn't care about our existential realizations." "Right. Business." Damien pulled out his phone. "I'll have my team send the collection files to a secure server you can access remotely. Make sure the access point is triple encrypted and routed through at least 4 proxy servers. If anyone traces this back, they won't. I have people who make careers out of hiding money from governments. Hiding data is easier." She nodded, pulling out her ancient laptop and various pieces of equipment that looked simultaneously high-tech and held together with hope. "I'll need high-resolution scans of every painting in the collection, multiple angles, detailed close-ups of signatures and aging patterns. And I'll need them tonight. That's a lot of scans. It's a lot of stolen art. We're on a deadline." Damien made the calls while Evelyn set up what she called her mobile authentication lab, a combination of specialized software, digital microscopy tools, and what appeared to be a regular magnifying glass that she insisted was calibrated for 18th century pigment analysis. By 8 p.m., the files started arriving. By 9, Evelyn was deep in analysis mode, cross-referencing brushstrokes and canvas aging and chemical compositions with the kind of focused intensity that made Damien feel like he was watching someone speak a language he'd never learned. He tried to help. She politely but firmly told him he was distracting her. So he wandered the house instead, pulling sheets off furniture and discovering the remnants of a life he'd never bothered understanding. Maria's family had money, but not his kind of money. Their wealth was older, quieter, the kind that came with history instead of ambition. In the bedroom, he found a photo album tucked in a drawer. Pictures of Maria as a child, as a teenager, as a young woman at art galleries and charity galas and family gatherings. And in several of the photos, hovering in the background or standing beside her parents, was Alexandre Moreau. Damien brought the album to the study. "He was at her childhood," he said, showing Evelyn. She barely glanced up. "Makes sense. Alexander and your wife's family probably moved in the same circles. Old European money tends to cluster. But what if it's more than that? What if Maria was involved in—" "Damien." Evelyn's voice was patient but strained. "I'm trying to analyze 17 paintings simultaneously while creating documentation that won't implicate either of us. Your wife's connection to Alexander is interesting, but unless it directly relates to authenticating stolen art, it's not my priority right now." He backed off, chastened. Hours crawled by. Evelyn worked with the kind of methodical precision that would have been boring to watch if it wasn't so clearly brilliant. She'd examine a scan, make notes in a language that was half academic jargon and half personal shorthand, cross-reference with databases and books and her own memory, then move to the next painting. Around midnight, Damien brought her coffee from the ancient kitchen. "This place has terrible coffee," he said, setting the mug beside her laptop. "It's perfect." She took a sip and made a face. "Okay, it's terrible, but it's caffeinated and I'm not picky." "How's it going?" "Slowly." She rubbed her eyes. "Half these paintings are definitely from my family's collection. The signatures match, the aging is consistent, the provenance gaps align with when Alexandra would have had access. But proving they're stolen without revealing how I know they're stolen, that's the trick. Can you do it?" "I think so." Academic authentication typically relies on comparative analysis, matching brush techniques, pigment composition, historical records. I can write a report that references all the right sources without mentioning that I personally studied these exact paintings in my family's private vault. She pulled up a document covered in technical language. "See? Professional, thorough, completely anonymous." Damien scanned the text. He understood maybe a third of it. "And this will hold up legally?" "If it comes from the right expert, yes, which is where your lawyers come in. We need to create a paper trail showing this authentication was commissioned by a legitimate consultant hired through proper channels. Someone real but untraceable to me." "I can arrange that." "Good. Because if Victor's investors dig into this and find anything suspicious, the whole thing collapses." She saved the document. I should have preliminary findings ready by morning, full authentication report by tomorrow evening. That gives you 48 hours before Victor's deadline. You're working too fast. I'm working desperate. She met his eyes. The longer we're here, the higher the chance someone notices. Alexander has to have contacts monitoring the collection. If he realizes someone's authenticating the paintings, he might move them, or destroy the evidence, or... She stopped. We have a narrow window. I'm using it. Damien wanted to argue, but she was right. They were playing a dangerous game with too many variables and not enough control. Get some rest, he said. You've been staring at screens for 4 hours straight. I'm fine. You're vibrating from caffeine and stress. Still fine. Evelyn. She looked up and he saw the fear underneath the determination. Not fear of being caught, fear of failing, of letting stolen art stay stolen because she was too scared to surface. What if this doesn't work? She said quietly. What if we expose the theft and my father still finds me? What if Alexander has insurance we haven't thought of? What if... Then we deal with it. Damien surprised himself with how certain he sounded. But spiraling into worst-case scenarios at midnight doesn't help anyone. You need sleep. Real sleep, not caffeinated anxiety disguised as productivity. I don't sleep well. Neither do I. They looked at each other across the cluttered desk. Two people who'd accidentally stumbled into something bigger than a business deal. Tell me about your daughter, Evelyn said suddenly. The subject change caught him off guard. Sophie? You said she's the only thing you've done right. I want to know why. Damien sat down in the dusty armchair across from her. She's 6, smart as hell, likes dinosaurs and space and asking questions I don't know how to answer. She has her mother's eyes, but my stubbornness, which is probably going to make her teenage years a nightmare. He smiled despite himself. Last week, she told her teacher that money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy a telescope, which makes looking at stars easier, so it's basically the same thing. Evelyn laughed. She sounds wonderful. She is, and I'm failing her. The admission hurt coming out. I work 16-hour days. I miss school events and bedtime stories and parent-teacher conferences. Her nanny knows more about her daily life than I do, and I keep telling myself it's because I'm building something for her future. But really? He exhaled slowly. I'm just scared of being a father the way I'm supposed to be. Actually present, actually vulnerable, actually giving a damn about something more than quarterly returns. You're here, aren't you? Risking a $1 billion deal to help someone you humiliated in a restaurant? That's not the same as being a good father. No, Evelyn agreed, but it's evidence you're capable of growth, which is more than a lot of people manage. They fell into comfortable silence. The house creaked around them, old wood settling, wind moving through cracks in the windows. I'm terrified, Evelyn said eventually, of my father finding me, of Alexander getting away with this, of spending the rest of my life running from shadows. She looked at Damien. But I'm more terrified of looking back in 20 years and realizing I had a chance to do something that mattered, and I was too scared to try. Then we don't waste the chance. Even if it costs you the deal? Even then. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, we finished this. She turned back to her laptop, then paused. And Damien, thank you for not treating this like just another transaction. You're welcome. He left her to work and wandered upstairs to one of the bedrooms. The sheets were dusty but clean enough. Through the window, he could see the overgrown garden bathed in moonlight, wild and beautiful and forgotten. His phone buzzed. Sophie's nanny. She's asking when you're coming home. What should I tell her? Damien stared at the message, guilt twisting in his chest. Here he was, halfway across the world, helping a woman he barely knew while his daughter waited for him in Chicago. Tell her I'm working on something important. I'll be home soon. She says you're always working on something important. The words landed like a punch. I know. I'm sorry. Tell her. Tell her I love her. I will. But she needs to hear it from you. Damien closed his phone and sat in the dark, listening to Evelyn work downstairs and thinking about all the ways a person could be present without actually being there. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of his daughter standing in an empty museum, surrounded by priceless art she couldn't touch, asking why everything beautiful had to be locked away behind glass. He woke at dawn to the smell of terrible coffee and Evelyn's voice drifting up from the study, speaking rapid French on the phone. He couldn't follow most of it, but he caught enough words, authentication, provenance, legal documentation, to understand she was already deep into phase 2 of whatever plan she'd constructed while he slept. Downstairs, he found her surrounded by printouts and reference books, and enough empty coffee mugs to suggest she'd never actually gone to bed. "Please tell me you slept," he said. "I napped." She didn't look up from the document she was editing. For almost an hour, very restful. "That's not sleep, that's blinking slowly. I'll sleep when we're done." She finally met his eyes, and he saw exhaustion there, but also something fiercer. Determination. "I finished the preliminary authentication. 14 of the 17 paintings are definitely from my family's collection. The other 3 are legitimate purchases Alexandra made years ago, probably to pad the collection and make it look less suspicious. So we can prove they're stolen? We can prove they originated from a specific Luxembourg collection held in private trust since the 1790s. Whether that proves theft depends on how good your lawyers are at connecting dots without me having to testify." Damien pulled out his phone. "I'll get them started on the legal framework." The next 12 hours blurred together in a chaos of encrypted calls, legal consultations, and Evelyn's increasingly detailed authentication reports. Damien's lawyers built a case that referenced anonymous expert testimony, historical records, and chemical analysis. Victor's team pushed back, demanding to know the expert's credentials. Damien's team deflected with enough legal jargon to make the questions feel irrelevant. By 6 p.m., they had what they needed, a legally defensible authentication report that proved the paintings were genuine, historically significant, and almost certainly stolen from their rightful owners. Damien sent it to Victor. Then they waited. Evelyn paced the study like a caged animal, too wired to sit still. What if he doesn't believe it? What if he demands to meet the expert in person? What if... Damien's phone rang, Victor's name on the screen. He answered on speaker. "Damien." Victor's voice was careful, controlled. "I've reviewed the authentication report. It's thorough, professional. Raises some very uncomfortable questions about the collection's provenance. Questions we need to address before moving forward," Damien said carefully. "Indeed." A pause. "My legal team advises that proceeding with the acquisition under these circumstances would expose us to significant liability. If these paintings are stolen, and your report strongly suggests they are, we can't touch them." Evelyn closed her eyes. "However," Victor continued, "I'm quite impressed with how you handled this. Most people would have buried the evidence to salvage the deal. You chose transparency. That speaks to integrity. The right thing isn't always the profitable thing." "How remarkably mature of you." Victor actually sounded amused. "I'm pulling out of the Moreau acquisition, but I'd like to discuss alternative opportunities. You've proven you can be trusted with complicated situations. That's worth more than one deal." Damien felt something shift in his chest. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. "I'd appreciate that." "Good. I'll have my people contact yours next week. In the meantime, I suggest you notify the relevant authorities about the stolen artwork. I'd hate for Alexandra Moreau to disappear before facing consequences." The call ended. Evelyn opened her eyes. "Did that just happen?" "I think so." "You lost a $2.3 billion deal." "I did." "And you're smiling." "I am." And he was, actually smiling. "Because for the first time in 3 years, I did something that wasn't about money or power or building an empire Sophie will inherit and probably resent. I did something that was just right." Evelyn sat down heavily. "I can't believe that worked." "Neither can I." They looked at each other, two people who'd somehow stumbled through a minefield and come out intact on the other side. "Now what?" Evelyn asked. "Now," Damien said, pulling up another number on his phone. "We make sure Alexandra Moreau gets exactly what's coming to him." The call to Interpol's art crime unit should have felt triumphant. Instead, Damien watched Evelyn's hand shake as she clutched her cold coffee, her face pale under the study's dim lighting. "Once we make this official," she said quietly, "there's no taking it back. Alexandra gets investigated. My family gets contacted about their stolen property. Questions get asked about who authenticated the collection. Your name stays buried in legal protection. Anonymous expert, remember? Nothing stays buried forever." She set down the mug. "My father has resources most people can't imagine. If he wants to find out who authenticated these paintings, he will. And then we deal with it. Damien kept his voice steady. But letting Alexander walk because you're afraid of hypotheticals? That's not dealing with anything. That's just different flavor of hiding. Her jaw tightened. You don't get to lecture me about hiding. You've been hiding from your daughter for 3 years behind work and money and the excuse that you're building something for her future. The words hit harder because they were true. You're right, he said. I have been hiding. From being a real father, from actually feeling things, from any situation where money can't solve the problem. But at least I'm trying to change that. What are you doing besides running? Evelyn stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against old wood. I'm surviving. That's what I'm doing. Surviving in a world where powerful men think they own everything, including the people around them. Her voice cracked slightly. You have no idea what it's like to be someone's property. To have your entire existence planned out before you're old enough to have opinions about it. To know that your worth is measured entirely by who you marry and what children you produce and how well you smile at charity galas. You're right. I don't know what that's like. Damien moved closer but didn't touch her. But I know what it's like to build a prison out of your own choices. To wake up one day and realize the empire you created is just an expensive cage. And I know that breaking out of that cage, actually breaking out, not just changing the locks, requires doing things that scare the hell out of you. She turned away, staring at the garden through dusty windows. Outside, dawn was breaking over Luxembourg countryside, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. What if making this call means I lose everything again? Her voice was barely audible. The anonymity, the freedom, the life I built where nobody expects anything from me except clean tables and correct orders? Then you build something new, something better. He paused. You've already started. That foundation, the repatriation work, the support for overlooked researchers. That's not hiding. That's the opposite of hiding. It's $25 million of your money doing good things while I stay invisible behind it. So stop being invisible. Put your name on it. Take credit for the work. Let the world see Evelyn Hart for who she actually is instead of who her father wanted her to be. She laughed, but it sounded broken. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. But it's also the only way forward that doesn't involve spending the rest of your life waiting tables and pretending you're not brilliant. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier. Make the call. Report the theft. Start whatever legal nightmare we're about to walk into. She turned back to face him. But I need something from you first. Name it. When this is over, when Alexander is arrested or the paintings are returned or whatever happens, you go home to Sophie. Not in 3 days or next week or when the next deal closes. Immediately. You get on a plane and you read her a bedtime story and you actually be her father instead of just the guy who pays for everything. Damien felt something tight in his chest. Deal. I'm serious. No excuses about board meetings or investor calls or... I said deal. He pulled out his phone. And for the record, you're going to make a terrible waitress after all this. You've gotten way too comfortable giving billionaires orders. Someone has to keep you honest. Apparently. The call to Interpol connected through to a Detective Laurent Rousseau, whose voice carried the particular weariness of someone who'd spent too many years chasing criminals with better lawyers than evidence. Monsieur Laurent, Rousseau said in French-accented English. You're calling about the Moreau collection? Damien put it on speaker. I am. I have documentation suggesting a significant portion of the collection was stolen from its rightful owners. We've had our eye on Alexandre Moreau for some time. The man has a talent for operating in legal gray areas. A pause. Your documentation, how reliable is it? Authenticated by one of the world's leading experts in 18th century European art. I can send you the full report. Please do, though I should warn you, pursuing this will be complicated. The Moreau family has considerable influence in Luxembourg. Alexander specifically has connections that make building a case challenging. Evelyn leaned toward the phone. What if you had testimony from someone with direct knowledge of the collection's original ownership? Rousseau's tone sharpened. That would change everything. Do you have such a witness? Damien and Evelyn locked eyes. This was the moment. The point where anonymous authentication became personal testimony, where Evelyn's carefully constructed invisibility started to crack. Potentially, Damien said carefully, but the witness would need protection, complete anonymity until absolutely necessary for prosecution. That can be arranged. Art theft cases often involve sensitive witnesses. We have protocols. The sound of typing. I'm sending you secure contact information. Have your witness reach out directly. We'll coordinate from there. After the call ended, Evelyn sat back down, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. I just agreed to potentially testify against Alexandre Moreau, she said, a man who has dinner with Luxembourg's finance minister, who golfs with half the European Parliament, who could make my life very difficult very quickly. You agreed to potentially testify, with protection, under controlled circumstances. Damien forwarded the Interpol contact information to her encrypted email. You're not alone in this. I've been alone in everything for 2 years. It's hard to remember what not alone feels like. Before Damien could respond, his phone rang again. His lawyer, Marcus. Tell me you didn't actually torpedo the Moreau deal, Marcus said without preamble. I did. Are you having a mental breakdown? Should I be calling doctors? I'm fine. The deal was built on stolen art. Walking away was the right move. Marcus was silent for a beat. Who are you, and what have you done with Damien Laurent? Funny. I'm not joking. 3 days ago, you would have buried that authentication report and closed the deal anyway. Now you're voluntarily nuking a billion-dollar acquisition on moral grounds. A pause. This is about the waitress, isn't it? Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. Her name is Evelyn, Damien said. And yes, she helped me realize some things about how I've been operating. I see. Marcus's tone shifted to something more serious. Well, since you've already committed financial suicide, I should probably tell you that Victor Ashford's team just reached out. They want to discuss a different acquisition, smaller scale but potentially more stable long-term growth, something about sustainable art preservation partnerships. Victor said he'd call next week. Apparently he's impressed enough to move faster. He's also asking if your ethical consultant might be available for future authentication work. Another pause. He means the waitress, doesn't he? Evelyn made a strangled noise that might have been a laugh. I'll discuss it with her, Damien said. Send me the details. After he hung up, Evelyn was staring at him. Ethical consultant. Victor's words, not mine. I waited tables 3 days ago. Now I'm apparently consulting for British investors on art preservation ethics. She shook her head. This is insane. This is what happens when you stop hiding behind a minimum wage job and let people see what you're actually capable of. Damien's phone buzzed with Marcus's email. Victor's offering a legitimate consulting contract, competitive rates, full anonymity if you want it, focusing on authentication and provenance verification for ethical acquisitions. Define competitive rates. He showed her the number. Evelyn went pale. That's more than I made in 2 years of waitressing. That's what your expertise is actually worth. For one consultation. For being the best at what you do. Damien set his phone down. You can say no. Keep working at Aurelius. Keep the anonymity. Pretend none of this happened. But you'd be wasting something rare. And Victor Ashford doesn't offer contracts to people he doesn't respect. She stood up, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the glass. If I take this, if I start doing authentication work professionally again, my father will eventually hear about it. The art world is small. People talk. So you use a pseudonym. Plenty of experts work under professional names that aren't their legal identities. It's still a trail, still exposure. Yes, but it's also a life, a real one, where you do meaningful work instead of serving coffee to people who don't see you. He joined her at the window. You told me survival without purpose feels like dying slowly. This is purpose, Evelyn. Scary, exposed, risky purpose. But purpose. She didn't answer immediately. Outside, the garden was fully visible now in morning light. Wild roses climbing over stone walls. Ancient trees twisted into shapes that spoke of centuries weathering storms. Beauty that had survived despite neglect. I need to walk, she said abruptly. Clear my head. Make sense of all this. Want company? No, I need to think. He watched her grab her worn coat and disappear into the garden, moving between overgrown paths with the careful steps of someone revisiting a memory. She sat on the same stone bench she'd mentioned before, where she'd waited as a child while her father conducted business she didn't understand. Damien gave her privacy and turned his attention to damage control. His board was going to be furious about the collapsed acquisition. His investors would demand explanations. The business press would have questions about why he'd walked away from such a massive deal. He drafted an email explaining that due diligence had revealed ethical concerns that made proceeding impossible. Professional. Vague enough to avoid details. The kind of corporate language that said everything and nothing. Before he could send it, his phone rang. Sophie's name on the screen. His heart jumped. She never called him directly. The nanny always managed their communication. Sophie? Daddy? Her voice was small, uncertain. Are you still working? I am, sweetheart, but I'm almost done. I'll be home soon. You always say soon. Not accusatory, just sad. Ms. Rachel says soon means maybe never. Ms. Rachel is wrong. I promise I'll be home in 2 days maximum. Can we go to the planetarium? You said we would, but then you were busy. Guilt twisted hard. He'd promised her that trip 3 months ago. Yes, as soon as I get back, we'll go. Just you and me. No work, no phone calls, just us looking at stars. You promise, not work promise? The distinction killed him. She'd learned the difference between his real promises and the ones he broke for business. I promise, he said. The most important promise I've made in a long time. Okay. A pause. I miss you, Daddy. I miss you too, baby girl, so much. After they hung up, Damien sat in the dusty study of a house that belonged to his dead wife's family, surrounded by evidence of conspiracies and stolen art and choices that had led him to this exact moment, and felt the weight of everything he'd been avoiding. Sophie deserved better than a father who prioritized deals over dinosaur facts and quarterly returns over bedtime stories. She deserved presence, attention, actual love, instead of expensive gifts meant to substitute for time. Evelyn was right. He'd been hiding, building an empire to avoid building a relationship with the one person who actually mattered. He pulled up his calendar, started canceling meetings. Next week's board presentation, the investor dinner, the conference call with Tokyo. All of it could wait or happen without him. For the first time in 3 years, his daughter was going to come first. Outside, Evelyn had stood up from the bench and was examining the roses, touching petals with careful fingers. Even from a distance, Damien could see the conflict in her posture. Shoulders tight, head down, someone wrestling with a decision that had no easy answer. His phone buzzed. An email from Detective Rousseau. They'd moved fast. Alexandra Moreau was being brought in for questioning based on the preliminary authentication report. No arrest yet, but enough evidence to start formal investigation. The detective wanted to know when Evelyn might be available for protected testimony. Damien forwarded it to her encrypted email, then went outside. The garden smelled like earth and wild growth, things that had been beautiful once and could be beautiful again with attention. Evelyn stood among the roses, her coat pulled tight, looking smaller somehow in the overgrown space. Interpol moved on Alexander, Damien said. He's being questioned. She nodded without turning. I got the email. You don't have to testify. The authentication report might be enough. It won't be. Not for conviction. They'll need someone who can verify the collection's original ownership in court. She turned to face him, which means me, eventually, probably. We can fight it. Get the charges to stick without your testimony. And if we can't? She gestured at the garden. I sat right there 20 years ago reading Baudelaire and dreaming about being anywhere else. And now I'm back in Luxembourg, hiding in the same house, making the same choice about whether to stay invisible or risk everything for something that matters. Her laugh was bitter. I thought running away meant I wouldn't have to keep making this choice. Turns out I've been making it every single day. Choose fear or choose courage. Choose hiding or choose living. What do you want to choose? I want to choose not having to choose. I want a life where testifying against my father's former business partner doesn't mean risking exposure to my father himself. Where doing good work doesn't require constant vigilance about who might recognize my name. Where I can just exist without always looking over my shoulder. That life doesn't exist, not really. Everyone's dealing with something. Easy to say when your something is self-inflicted workaholism and guilt about your daughter. Mine is decades of family dysfunction and the very real possibility of being dragged back into a life I'd rather die than return to. The words hung between them, sharp and honest. You're right, Damien said. My problems are different than yours. Easier in some ways, harder in others. But we're both standing in this garden trying to figure out how to be better than we've been. That counts for something. Evelyn walked over to the stone wall, ran her hand along moss-covered rock. You know what the worst part is? I actually miss it sometimes. The research, the academic community, the feeling of discovering something nobody else has seen. I miss being good at something that mattered instead of just being good at staying invisible. So stop being invisible. You keep saying that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it is possible. He moved closer. Take Victor's consulting offer. Do authentication work under a pseudonym. Build the foundation into something real that helps people and preserves culture. Use your expertise to make things better instead of just safer. And when my father inevitably finds out, then you deal with it. With lawyers, with protection, with people who actually give a damn about you instead of what you represent. He paused. You said running away felt like cowardice. Prove it wasn't. Prove you left to build something better, not just to hide from something worse. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the overgrown garden and the old stone house and the Luxembourg countryside rolling away toward horizons she'd once known intimately. If I do this, if I testify and take the consulting work and actually try to have a real life, I need you to understand something. She turned to face him fully. I'm not doing it because you convinced me. I'm doing it because I'm tired of being scared, tired of making myself small, tired of serving coffee to people who don't see me when I could be preserving culture and supporting researchers and doing work that actually matters. Understood. And I'm still angry at you for how you treated me in that restaurant. You should be. I was an asshole. You were. But you're trying to be better. That counts for something. She smiled slightly. Not much, but something. They walked back to the house together, and Damien realized somewhere in the past 72 hours they'd stopped being a desperate billionaire and the expert he needed and become something else. Not quite friends, not quite partners. Something undefined that felt important anyway. Inside, Evelyn opened her laptop and started composing an email to Detective Rousseau. I'm setting conditions, she said as she typed. Protected identity until absolutely necessary. All testimony given in closed proceedings. Full legal representation at Luxembourg's expense. And a guarantee that my involvement stays confidential unless conviction is impossible without it. They won't agree to all that. Then they don't get my testimony. She hit send. I'm done letting people dictate terms to me. While they waited for Rousseau's response, Damien's phone buzzed continuously, his board demanding updates. Marcus asking if he'd lost his mind. Victor's team sending contract details for the new acquisition opportunity. He ignored most of it and instead texted Sophie's nanny. Clear my schedule for next week, all of it. I'm taking Sophie to the planetarium and anywhere else she wants to go. No exceptions. The response came back immediately. She'll be so happy. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should have done this 3 years ago. Rousseau's response arrived within the hour. He agreed to most of Evelyn's conditions, pushed back on a few details, and requested a video call to discuss logistics. The call was tense, professional, and surprisingly respectful. Rousseau understood the sensitivity of Evelyn's situation and had worked similar cases before. He outlined a timeline. Alexander's questioning would continue for several days, during which they'd build the case using the authentication report and financial records. If they could prove theft without witness testimony, they would. But if Alexander's lawyers managed to create reasonable doubt about the collection's provenance, Evelyn's testimony would become essential. I need to be clear, Rousseau said. Your father will likely be contacted regardless. The collection belongs to his family trust. We'll need his cooperation to document the theft formally. Evelyn's face went carefully blank. When? Within the week. We've already sent preliminary notification that we're investigating the disappearance of assets from his holdings. And his response? He's sending his lawyers. Very expensive lawyers who are already making this complicated. Rousseau's expression was sympathetic. I'm sorry. I know this puts you in a difficult position. After the call ended, Evelyn sat very still. He knows, she said quietly. Or he will soon. Someone's investigating stolen art from his collection, and there's only one person alive with the expertise to authenticate it properly. He'll figure it out. Maybe not. You've been off the grid for 2 years. Why would he think you surfaced now? Because he knows me better than anyone. And he knows I could never walk away from Mercier's work. Not really, not permanently. She looked at Damien. This was always going to end with him finding me. I just hoped it would take longer. So what do? We finish what we started. I give my testimony if needed. We make sure Alexander pays for what he did. And then, she trailed off. Then I deal with whatever comes next. You don't have to deal with it alone. Why would you help me with my family drama? You got what you needed. Victor's offering you a new deal. The Moreau acquisition is done. You can walk away clean. I could, Damien agreed. But I'm not going to. Because walking away clean from situations that matter is exactly the problem I'm trying to fix. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. You're serious? Completely. Why? Because you called me out for being an asshole and you were right. Because helping you feels more important than any deal I've ever closed. Because my daughter asked me if I was still working, and I realized everything I've been working for doesn't mean anything if I'm not actually present for the people who matter. He paused. And because I think you're brave and brilliant and you deserve people in your corner when your father's lawyers come calling. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but close. Okay, she said softly. Okay. They spent the rest of the day preparing for whatever came next. Evelyn documented everything she remembered about the collection's original storage, creating a paper trail that would support her eventual testimony. Damien coordinated with his legal team to ensure she'd have representation that matched her father's resources. By evening, they'd built something that looked almost like a case. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but solid enough to have a chance. We should eat, Damien said, realizing neither of them had consumed anything but terrible coffee in 12 hours. There's a village about 10 minutes from here, small restaurant, probably nothing fancy. I've had enough fancy for one lifetime. Evelyn closed her laptop. Small village restaurant sounds perfect. The place was called Le Petit Jardin, tucked between a bakery and a bookshop on a narrow cobblestone street. Inside it was warm and crowded and smelled like butter and wine and bread baking. They got a corner table near the window. Evelyn ordered in French, falling into easy conversation with the server about the day's specials. Damien watched her transform, the nervous waitress from Chicago disappearing entirely, replaced by someone confident and present and completely in her element. You're different here, he said after the server left. Language does that. French is who I was before I became who I am now. She smiled slightly. If that makes any sense. It does, actually. The food came quickly, simple, perfect, the kind of meal that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it with love and practice. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, just two people taking a break from conspiracy and stolen art and complicated family dynamics. Tell me something, Evelyn said eventually. If this all works, if Alexander gets convicted and the paintings go back to my family and I manage to avoid getting dragged home, what happens to you? Do you just return to closing billion-dollar deals and missing your daughter's bedtime? I don't know, Damien admitted. 3 days ago, I would have said yes. That's all I know how to do. Work, acquire, build. But now? He set down his fork. I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not performing being a successful billionaire. That sounds terrifying. It really is, but probably necessary. What does Sophie think about all this? She thinks I work too much and make promises I don't keep. She's not wrong. He pulled out his phone, showed Evelyn the background photo, Sophie at 5 years old, holding a telescope almost as big as she was, grinning like she'd discovered the universe. She wants to be an astronomer, studies constellations, asks questions about dark matter that I have to Google because I don't know the answers. She's beautiful. She's everything I'm terrified of ruining. The admission came out raw. Her mother died and left her with a father who doesn't know how to be present, who throws money at problems instead of actually solving them, who missed her 6th birthday because I was closing a deal in Singapore. Evelyn reached across the table, touched his hand briefly. You're here now, trying to change. That's not nothing. It's 3 years too late. Maybe, but late is better than never. They finished dinner as the sun set over Luxembourg, painting the cobblestone street in shades of amber and rose. Walking back to the car, Evelyn stopped suddenly. There's something I need to tell you, she said, about your wife and Alexandra. Damien's stomach tightened. What about them? The photos we found, Maria at all those events with Alexandra in the background. That wasn't coincidence. She was working for him. What? Not openly. But I recognized some of those gallery openings, those charity galas. They were fronts for art transactions, places where collectors and dealers meet to arrange private sales. Evelyn's voice was careful. Your wife was facilitating connections, introducing buyers to sellers. She probably didn't know the art was stolen, but she was part of Alexandra's network. Damien felt cold. How do you know this? Because I attended some of those same events as a teenager. My father dragged me along to network. I remember seeing Maria there. She was always so polite, so charming, always knew exactly who to introduce to whom. Evelyn met his eyes. I think Alexandra recruited her, used her family connections and social access to expand his operation, and when she died, he lost his bridge into certain circles. Damien's mind raced. That's why the collection sat untouched for 3 years. He needed time to find another way to liquidate everything. Exactly. They stood on the darkening street, processing implications that made everything more complicated. Did Maria know? Damien asked quietly. That the art was stolen? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. People are good at not asking questions when the money is convenient. Evelyn's voice gentled. I'm sorry. I know this makes her complicit in something terrible. She was already complicit in a terrible marriage. This is just one more thing to add to the pile of truths I avoided dealing with. He started walking again. Thank you for telling me. Back at the house, exhaustion finally caught up with both of them. Evelyn claimed one of the upstairs bedrooms. Damien took another. For the first time in days, they actually slept. Real sleep, not caffeinated vigilance disguised as rest. Damien woke at dawn to his phone buzzing. Marcus. Board wants an emergency meeting. They're threatening a vote of no confidence over the Moreau situation. He stared at the message, then typed back. Schedule it for next month. I'm taking personal time. They won't wait a month, then they can vote without me. I have more important things to do. He turned off his phone entirely and went downstairs. Evelyn was already awake, standing in the garden with coffee, watching sunrise paint the Luxembourg hills gold. Morning, he said, joining her with his own mug of terrible coffee. Morning. She didn't look at him, just kept watching the light change. I contacted Rousseau, told him I'd testify if needed. Full cooperation, no more conditions. Evelyn, I'm done hiding, she said simply. My father is going to find out I'm alive regardless. Alexandra needs to face consequences. And I'm tired of being scared of things that might happen instead of dealing with what's actually happening. That's brave. That's tired. She turned to face him. But maybe tired and brave look the same sometimes. Maybe they do. Hey. They stood in the garden as morning broke completely over Luxembourg, two people who'd accidentally found each other while looking for different things, and Damien realized something that should have been obvious days ago. This wasn't just about stolen art or failed acquisitions or complicated family dynamics anymore. It was about two people learning to stop running from the things that scared them and actually face the messy, complicated, terrifying work of being present in their own lives. The call came 3 days later while Evelyn was reviewing provenance documents in the study, and Damien was on the phone with Sophie, promising her they'd visit the planetarium the moment he got home. Detective Rousseau's name flashed across Evelyn's screen, and the look on her face when she answered made Damien end his call mid-sentence. When? Evelyn asked, her voice tight. She listened, nodded, closed her eyes briefly. I understand. Yes, I'll be there. She set down the phone with careful precision, like it might explode. Alexandra's lawyers got him released on bail. He's claiming the entire collection was legitimately acquired through proper channels, that any documentation gaps are due to the previous owner's poor record-keeping, and that this whole investigation is a witch hunt orchestrated by competitors trying to damage his reputation. She looked up. He's also filed a countersuit against Interpol for harassment and is demanding to know who authenticated the paintings. They can't reveal that. You have protection. Protection lasts until it becomes inconvenient for prosecution. If his lawyers push hard enough, if they argue that my testimony is essential to their defense, if they claim their client's rights are being violated by anonymous accusations, she stood up abruptly. I need air. But before she could reach the door, her phone rang again. Unknown number, Luxembourg area code. They both stared at it. Don't answer, Damien said. Evelyn answered anyway, putting it on speaker. Evelyn Marie Catherine Hart. The voice was male, older, refined in that particular way that came from generations of inherited authority. It's been a long time. She went completely still. Father, 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days to be precise. That's how long you've been hiding from your responsibilities, from your family, from me. No anger in his tone, just statement of fact, which was somehow worse. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually find you? How did you get this number? The same way I've always gotten what I need. Money, resources, and patience. A pause. You've caused quite a situation with this Alexandra business. Interpol calling, lawyers demanding meetings, questions about stolen art from my private collection, questions I couldn't answer because my only daughter, the one person who studied these paintings extensively, disappeared without explanation. Evelyn's hands were shaking. The collection was stolen. Alexander took advantage of your trust, and I'm aware of what Alexander did. I've known for 18 months. What I wasn't aware of was that you were alive and well and working as a waitress in Chicago instead of fulfilling your obligations to this family. Damien moved closer to Evelyn, close enough that she could feel his presence without him actually touching her. I left, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than her hands, because you tried to force me into a life I didn't want, a marriage I didn't choose, a future that belonged to you, not me. I tried to secure your future, to ensure you had stability, position, influence. Everything I built was for you. Everything you built was for yourself. I was just the next generation of the same prison. She took a breath. I'm not coming back. Her father laughed, quiet, genuinely amused. My dear child, you think you have a choice? You've made yourself essential to a criminal investigation involving hundreds of millions in stolen assets. Your testimony is the only thing that can definitively prove Alexander's guilt, which means you will testify. And when you do, your identity becomes public record. Your location, your life, everything you've hidden for 2 years becomes accessible. Another pause. Unless we come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? You return home, resume your position in the family. We announce that you've been on an extended research sabbatical, studying under a pseudonym, eccentric perhaps, but acceptable for someone of your academic standing. You provide testimony against Alexander, we recover the stolen collection, and life continues as it should have all along. And if I refuse, then you testify anyway, your identity becomes public, and you lose the anonymity you've worked so hard to maintain. But without family protection, you'll be vulnerable to Alexander's considerable resources and vindictive nature. He's already making inquiries about the anonymous expert who destroyed his deal. How long do you think it takes before he connects the dots? Her father's voice softened slightly. I'm offering you safety, Evelyn. Protection. Everything you've been running from, certainly, but also everything you've been running toward. Come home. Evelyn looked at Damien, and he saw the conflict written across her face. Terror and exhaustion, and the temptation of simply surrendering to the inevitable. I need time to think, she said finally. You have 24 hours. After that, I contact Interpol directly and offer them a deal they can't refuse. Full cooperation and documented provenance in exchange for certain assurances about my daughter's future. He paused. Oh, and Evelyn? I know about Damien Laurent, the American billionaire with the dead wife and complicated business dealings. I know he's been helping you. I know he funded your little foundation. I know everything. So don't pretend this conversation is private. The call ended. The study felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. Evelyn sat down heavily, her face pale. He's going to force me back, she said quietly. One way or another. Either I go willingly and maintain some illusion of control, or I fight and lose anyway because he has more resources, more influence, more patience than I'll ever have. You have resources too. The foundation, Victor's consulting offer, legal protection. Against a man who just tracked down my encrypted phone number in less than a week? Who knew about you, about the foundation, about everything we've been doing? She laughed bitterly. I was naive to think I could actually stay hidden. My father plays chess while everyone else plays checkers. He probably knew where I was the entire time and was just waiting for the right moment to reel me back in. Damien pulled out his phone. We get you better lawyers, real protection. We fight this properly instead of what? Instead of accepting reality? Evelyn stood up. My father is right about one thing. The moment I testify, I'm exposed, and without his protection, Alexandra will come after me. The man stole $100 million in art and got released on bail. You think you won't retaliate against the person who destroyed his scheme? So you're just going to surrender, give up everything you built, and go back to being his prisoner? I'm going to survive. That's what I do. But her voice cracked on the words. They stood in the study, surrounded by documentation of theft and conspiracy, and all the evidence that had seemed so important hours ago. And Damien realized they were losing, not to Alexandra or the legal system or lack of resources. They were losing to the simple, crushing weight of a father who'd spent 2 years patiently waiting for his daughter to surface so he could reclaim her. There has to be another way, Damien said. There isn't. I've been looking for another way my entire life. It doesn't exist. Then we create one. You can't just create solutions because you want them to exist. That's not how the world works. Maybe not, but I didn't walk away from $1 billion deal and completely upend my life just to watch you give up because your father made one threatening phone call. Damien moved to stand directly in front of her. You said you were tired of being scared. You said you were done hiding. Was that just talk, or did you mean it? I meant it before I knew my father was actively tracking me. So he's tracking you. So he made threats. So he has resources and patience and 200 years of family influence. Damien's voice hardened. You know what else you have? Proof that his trusted business partner stole from him. Documentation that you're the world's leading expert on the stolen collection. Testimony that can either help recover his assets or disappear entirely, depending on your cooperation. He paused. Your father thinks he holds all the cards. What if he doesn't? Evelyn stared at him. You're suggesting I use the testimony as leverage. I'm suggesting you stop thinking like his daughter and start thinking like an expert who has something he desperately needs. That's manipulation. That's negotiation. There's a difference. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against cold glass. If I do this, if I try to negotiate with my father instead of just submitting, he'll make my life hell. You don't understand what he's capable of when someone defies him. You're right, I don't understand. But I understand what happens when you spend your whole life avoiding conflict because the other person might make things difficult. He thought of Sophie, of 3 years of missed bedtimes and broken promises, because work felt safer than vulnerability. Eventually, you look up and realize you've given away everything that mattered to avoid confrontations that were going to happen anyway. Evelyn turned back to face him. What exactly are you proposing? Call him back. Tell him you'll provide testimony, but on your terms. You work with Interpol to recover the collection. You help document the theft. You do everything necessary to ensure Alexandra faces consequences. But you do it as an independent expert, not as his daughter returning home. You maintain your freedom, your foundation, your life. And in exchange, he gets his art back and his reputation intact. He'll never agree to that. He might if the alternative is watching his collection disappear into Alexandra's legal labyrinth while his daughter remains estranged indefinitely. Damien pulled out his phone. We have 24 hours. Let's use them to build a position he can't refuse. They spent the next 6 hours constructing leverage. Damien's lawyers drafted agreements that would give Evelyn's testimony maximum legal protection while maintaining her independence. Victor's team provided documentation showing multiple institutions were interested in consulting with her, establishing her professional value outside her father's influence. They even got a preliminary offer from a Swiss museum willing to hire her as their chief authentication expert with full autonomy and competitive salary. By midnight, they had something that looked almost like negotiating power. Evelyn stared at the documents spread across the study desk. This might actually work. It will work, Damien said with more confidence than he felt. Or it'll blow up in my face and my father will make sure I never work in the art world again. That's possible too. You're not great at reassurance. I'm great at honesty. He sat down across from her. Look, there's no guarantee this works. Your father has decades of experience manipulating situations to his advantage. But at least this way you're fighting back instead of just accepting defeat. Isn't that worth something? Evelyn picked up her phone, stared at it for a long moment, then set it down again. I need to tell you something first, about why I'm so terrified of going back. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because if we're doing this, if you're really going to help me negotiate with my father, you need to understand what you're getting into. Damien waited. The arranged marriage, Evelyn said quietly. The one my father planned. It wasn't just about securing family alliances or preserving wealth. The man he chose was someone he could control. Someone who would ensure I stayed exactly where my father wanted me. Because I wasn't just his heir, I was his legacy, his proof that the family line would continue properly. Her voice went flat. And when I refused, when I said I wanted to make my own choices, he told me that my wants were irrelevant, that I was born into a role, not a life. And the sooner I accepted that, the easier everything would be. That's abuse. That's family tradition, according to him. Generations of daughters raised to be valuable rather than happy. She met Damien's eyes. When I left, I wasn't just running from an arranged marriage. I was running from the certainty that if I stayed, I'd eventually break. I'd accept the role, marry the man, produce the heirs, and spend the rest of my life wondering who I might have been if I'd been brave enough to leave sooner. You were brave enough. You left. I ran away in the middle of the night like a scared child. You made an impossible choice that saved your life. That's not cowardice. That's survival. Evelyn's eyes went bright with unshed tears. What if negotiating with him isn't enough? What if he agrees to my terms and then just waits for another opportunity to force me back? My father plays long games. He could accept this arrangement and spend the next 5 years undermining my independence until I have no choice but to return on his terms. Then we make the agreement ironclad. Legal protections that can't be undone. Public commitments he can't walk back without damaging his own reputation. You really think contracts and public statements will stop a man who spent 50 years manipulating outcomes to his advantage? No, Damien admitted, but I think they'll make it harder for him. And I think right now harder is the best we can do. She wiped her eyes impatiently. Why are you doing this? Really? You already walked away from one deal because of me. Your board is threatening a no-confidence vote. You should be in Chicago salvaging your reputation and spending time with your daughter, not in Luxembourg helping me fight battles with my dysfunctional family. Damien thought about all the easy answers he could give: professional courtesy, ethical obligation, basic human decency. But sitting in that dusty study at midnight with a woman who'd trusted him enough to share the worst parts of her history, he found himself telling the truth. But because watching you fight for your freedom reminds me that I've been living in my own kind of prison, built out of work and money, and the excuse that providing financially was the same as being emotionally present. And because Sophie asked me why I'm always mean to people and helping you feels like part of the answer. He paused. And because you called me out for treating you like you were invisible, and nobody had done that in years. Everyone else just accepts that billionaires are assholes. You refuse to. That mattered. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You're less terrible than I thought. High praise. I'm serious. When you walked into Aurelius that night, I thought you were just another entitled rich guy who'd treat me like furniture. But you're actually trying to be better. That's rare. I'm trying because you made it impossible to keep being the way I was. I made it impossible by serving you the wrong wine and speaking French. You made it impossible by being brilliant and brave and completely unwilling to let me hide behind money and status. He smiled slightly. Also, the French thing was pretty impressive. Victor still talks about it. She laughed, and the sound broke some of the tension in the room. Okay, let's do this. Let's call my father and see if negotiation is actually possible or if I'm about to completely destroy whatever fragile independence I have left. Damien handed her his phone. Use mine, harder to trace. You watch too many spy movies. You're negotiating with a man who tracked your encrypted number in less than a week. I'm being appropriately paranoid. She took the phone, dialed the number from memory, and put it on speaker. Her father answered on the second ring. Evelyn. I have a counteroffer, she said, her voice steadier than her hands. I'll provide full cooperation with the Interpol investigation. Complete testimony, documented provenance, everything necessary to recover the collection and ensure Alexander faces appropriate consequences. But I do it as an independent expert retained by the investigation, not as your daughter returning to the family. Silence on the other end. Then, continue. I maintain my current life. My work in Chicago, my foundation, my professional independence. You get your collection back, your reputation intact, and the satisfaction of knowing justice was served. Everyone wins. Except you remain estranged from your family. Except I remain free to make my own choices. Her father was quiet for a moment. And if I refuse your counteroffer? If I proceed with my original plan? Then you get nothing. No testimony, no cooperation, no recovery of assets worth hundreds of millions. I disappear again, and this time I make sure even your considerable resources can't find me. Evelyn's voice hardened. You taught me to play chess, father. You should have considered that I might actually learn. Another pause, longer this time. You're bluffing. You won't actually withhold testimony and let Alexander walk away with my collection. Try me. Evelyn, I'm not the scared daughter who ran away 2 years ago. I've built a life. I've done important work. I've learned that I don't need your approval or your protection or your carefully planned future to have value. She took a breath. So here's the reality. You can have a daughter who helps you recover your stolen assets while maintaining her independence. Or you can have no daughter at all. Choose. The silence stretched so long Damien thought the call had dropped. Finally, her father spoke. You've changed. I grew up. It happens when you're not being controlled every moment of every day. That's not fair. Everything I did was to protect you, to ensure you did it to ensure I fit into your vision of what the family should be. There's a difference. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. I'm not asking you to understand my choices. I'm asking you to respect them. Let me help with the investigation on my terms, and in return, you get your collection back and we both move forward with our separate lives. And if I want more than that, if I want my daughter back, then you'll have to accept the daughter I actually am, not the one you tried to create. She glanced at Damien. I have people who support me now, resources, legal protection. I'm not alone anymore, which means I'm not as easy to control as I used to be. Her father made a sound that might have been a laugh. The American billionaire, Damien Laurent. I've had him investigated. Interesting choice of ally. He's not an ally. He's a friend. And he treats me like I have value beyond who I was born to be. You should try it sometime. Evelyn, 24 hours, you said. I'm using them to give you my terms. Accept them or don't. But I'm done negotiating my existence. She ended the call before he could respond. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Damien took it from her gently. That was incredible. That was terrifying. She sat down abruptly. I just threatened my father, the man who controls half of Luxembourg's art market, who has connections to every major institution in Europe, who could destroy my professional reputation with 3 phone calls. You also just drew a line and dared him to cross it. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Hard to tell the difference right now. She looked up at him. What if he calls my bluff? What if he goes through with his original plan and I lose everything anyway? Then we deal with it, together. You're not alone in this anymore, remember? You keep saying that like it's simple. It is simple. Might not be easy, but it's simple. He sat down next to her. You stood up to your father. You set boundaries. You demanded respect. Whatever happens next, you did that, and nobody can take it away from you. Evelyn leaned back against the chair, exhausted. I need to sleep. Actual sleep, not just closing my eyes and panicking for 6 hours. Good idea. We both do. They headed upstairs to their separate rooms, but at the landing, Evelyn stopped. Thank you, she said quietly, for pushing me to fight instead of letting me give up. I needed that. You would have figured it out on your own eventually. Maybe, but having someone believe I could do it made it easier to actually try. She smiled slightly. You're going to be a good father when you get home to Sophie. If you can push me to be brave, you can definitely handle bedtime stories and planetarium trips. I hope you're right. I'm always right. I'm an academic. It's basically our entire personality. He laughed, and she disappeared into her room, leaving Damien alone in the hallway of a house that had belonged to his dead wife's family and somehow become the place where he'd learned to stop hiding behind work and money and the excuse that providing was the same as being present. His phone buzzed. An email from Marcus. Board vote scheduled for Monday. They're serious about the no confidence thing. You need to be there. Damien typed back. Tell them to vote without me. I'm done performing for people who measure worth in quarterly returns. You're going to regret this. Probably. But I'll regret it while actually being a father to my daughter, so overall, it's still an improvement. He turned off his phone, climbed into bed, and for the first time in years, fell asleep without worrying about deals or acquisitions or what the board would think. The response came at dawn. Damien woke to Evelyn knocking on his door, her laptop in hand, her expression unreadable. He agreed, she said. My father. He sent a formal acceptance of my terms. Full legal documentation, signed agreements, everything. Damien sat up. That's good news. It's suspicious news. He never gives in this easily. She showed him the email on her screen, pages of legal language that essentially said Evelyn would work as an independent expert on the investigation while her father agreed not to interfere with her personal or professional life. Maybe he actually respects your boundaries. Or maybe he's planning something we haven't anticipated. She set down the laptop. But either way, I have what I asked for: legal protection, professional independence, and a chance to help recover the stolen collection without sacrificing my freedom. So you're going to testify? I'm going to do my job. Authenticate the paintings, document the theft, provide whatever expertise the investigation needs. And then I'm going back to Chicago, and my foundation, and my life. She paused. What about you? What happens when you get home? I take Sophie to the planetarium. I have some very difficult conversations with my board about priorities and purpose. I probably lose my position as CEO because I walked away from too many deals and stopped caring about the things they care about. He shrugged. And then I figure out what comes next. That sounds terrifying. It really is. But it also sounds better than spending the rest of my life building an empire I don't actually want while missing the only thing that actually matters. Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed. We're a mess, aren't we? You running from your daughter, me running from my father. Both of us using work and geography and elaborate excuses to avoid dealing with actual emotions. At least we're self-aware messes. That's something, I guess. She stood up. Rousseau wants me in Luxembourg City this afternoon for formal testimony. This is really happening. Are you ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. She headed for the door, then turned back. When we get home, after all this is over, I want you to bring Sophie to the foundation. Let her see what we're building. Let her know that sometimes fighting for things that matter means risking things you have. I think she'd understand that. She'd like you. Everyone likes me once they get past the whole hiding my identity and running from my family thing. She smiled. It's my sparkling personality. After she left, Damien got ready for what would probably be the strangest day of his professional life, accompanying a former waitress turned art expert to provide testimony that would bring down a major criminal operation and possibly repair her relationship with her father. The Interpol office in Luxembourg City was unremarkable from the outside, just another government building on a street full of government buildings. Inside was different. Security checkpoints, serious people in serious suits, the quiet efficiency of law enforcement doing complicated work. Detective Rousseau met them in the lobby, his expression sympathetic. Miss Hart, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. Nothing about this has been easy, Evelyn said. Let's just get it done. The testimony took 4 hours. Evelyn walked them through every painting in the collection, explained provenance in excruciating detail, documented exactly how she knew the pieces had been stolen from her family's private holdings. She was professional, thorough, devastating to Alexander's defense. Damien watched from the observation room and realized he was seeing the real Evelyn Hart for the first time. Not the shy waitress, not the runaway heiress, but the brilliant scholar who'd spent her life studying something she loved and was finally being allowed to do it without hiding. When she finished, Rousseau looked satisfied. This should be more than enough to secure conviction. Alexander's lawyers can argue all they want about documentation gaps, but your testimony fills those gaps definitively. When will the trial be? Evelyn asked. Months, probably. These things take time, but you've done your part. The rest is legal process. He paused. Your father requested to speak with you. I told him it wasn't appropriate given the circumstances, but if you want— No, Evelyn said firmly. We have an agreement. I provide expertise, he respects my independence. Personal conversations aren't part of that agreement. Rousseau nodded. Understood. They left the building into afternoon sunshine, and Evelyn took a deep breath like someone who'd been holding it for hours. "It's done," she said. "It's done," Damien agreed. "I'm free. Actually free. No more hiding, no more running, just me and my work and my choices." "How does it feel?" She thought for a moment. "Terrifying and amazing, and like I might throw up from stress." She looked at him. "But mostly like I can finally breathe." They walked back to the car in comfortable silence, and Damien felt something shift in his chest. Relief, maybe? Or just the strange sensation of having done something purely because it was right instead of profitable. His phone buzzed. Marcus again. "Board voted. You're out as CEO effective immediately. They're appointing Richards as interim replacement." Damien stared at the message, waiting for panic or anger or regret. Instead, he felt lighter. "Good. Richards is better suited for the job anyway. Tell them I'll cooperate with the transition." "You're okay with this?" "I'm great with this. For the first time in years, I'm actually great." He showed Evelyn the message. She read it, then looked up. "You just lost your company. I lost a job I was terrible at. There's a difference." He put the phone away. "I'll still have my investments, my money, all the things that actually matter to the board. But I won't have the pressure of pretending I care about quarterly returns more than being present for my daughter." "What will you do?" "I have no idea, but I have time to figure it out. And I have a 6-year-old who wants to learn about dark matter. That feels like a good place to start." They drove back to the house one last time to collect their belongings. The place looked different in afternoon light, less gothic, more just old and beautiful and full of someone else's history. "Thank you," Evelyn said as they packed up her authentication equipment. "For everything, for pushing me to fight, for helping me negotiate with my father, for not letting me give up when it felt easier than trying. You did the fighting. I just provided moral support and occasionally terrible advice." "Your advice was fine. Your coffee was terrible." "The house's coffee was terrible. I was just the messenger." She laughed, and it sounded free in a way it hadn't before. They left Luxembourg that evening on separate flights, Evelyn back to Chicago and her foundation work, Damien to Sophie and whatever came next. At the airport, they stood in the departures area, surrounded by travelers and announcement boards and the constant motion of people going somewhere else. "This is weird," Evelyn said, "saying goodbye after everything." "It doesn't have to be goodbye. You're consulting for Victor now. We'll probably end up working together occasionally." "True. Though hopefully without the stolen art and family drama next time." "Definitely without the family drama." Damien paused. "You're going to do great things with that foundation. Change lives. Preserve culture. All the important work you were meant to do before your father tried to turn you into someone you weren't. And you're going to be an amazing father once you actually show up for it. Sophie's lucky to have you. She'll be lucky if I don't completely mess it up." "You won't. You care too much now." Evelyn picked up her worn backpack. "Take care of yourself, Damien Laurent. Try not to let the next billionaire emergency consume your entire life." "Take care of yourself, Evelyn Hart. Try not to let fear win when things get complicated." They hugged briefly. Awkward, sincere, the kind of embrace between people who'd accidentally become important to each other while trying to solve separate problems. Then Evelyn headed toward her gate, and Damien watched her disappear into the crowd, already pulling out her phone to check messages about foundation business and authentication requests and all the work she'd hidden from for 2 years and could finally do openly. His own flight boarded an hour later. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Damien turned off his work email and pulled up the photos of Sophie instead. 6 years of birthdays and school events and moments he'd been too busy to appreciate at the time. When he landed in Chicago, Sophie was waiting with her nanny at arrivals, holding a handmade sign that said "Welcome Home, Daddy" in uneven letters decorated with stars and planets. She crashed into him with the full force of 6-year-old enthusiasm, and Damien held her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and wondering how he'd ever thought anything was more important than this. "Did you finish your important work?" she asked. "I did." "Can we go to the planetarium now?" "Right now. No delays, no excuses. Just you and me and as many stars as you want to look at." Sophie beamed. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, baby girl, so much." They left the airport hand in hand, and for the first time in 3 years, Damien Laurent felt like he was finally going in the right direction. The planetarium was exactly as magical as Sophie had promised, and exactly as humbling as Damien had feared. They sat in the darkness while a voice explained the formation of galaxies and the death of stars, and Sophie whispered questions about black holes and dark matter that Damien had to admit he didn't know how to answer. "That's okay, Daddy," she said, patting his hand. "We can learn together." It was such a simple thing to say, but it cracked something open in Damien's chest. He'd spent 3 years thinking his job was to have all the answers, to provide everything, to be invulnerable and successful and worth the inheritance Sophie would someday receive. It had never occurred to him that maybe she just wanted someone to sit in the dark with her and admit when he didn't understand the universe either. After the show ended and they walked through exhibits about planets and solar systems, Sophie stopped in front of a display about the Voyager spacecraft. "It says here that Voyager is still sending messages back to Earth, even though it launched in 1977, she read slowly, her finger tracing the words. "That's before you were born, right, Daddy?" "Way before." "So it's been traveling alone in space for almost 50 years, just doing its job and sending information home." She looked up at him with those serious gray eyes that were so much like her mother's. "Do you think it gets lonely?" Damien knelt down to her level. "I don't know, baby girl, but I think even if it does get lonely, it's still doing something important, something that matters. Like how you were lonely when you were working all the time, but you thought you were doing something important for me?" The observation landed with the devastating accuracy that only 6-year-olds could manage. "Yeah," Damien said quietly. "Exactly like that, except I was wrong. The important thing wasn't the work. It was being here with you." Sophie hugged him fiercely. "I'm glad you figured it out." "Me too." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the planetarium, then got pizza at Sophie's favorite place, where the owners knew her by name and always gave her extra garlic bread. She told him about school and her friends and a project on dinosaurs she was doing with a girl named Emma, who apparently knew everything about velociraptors. Damien listened, actually listened instead of checking his phone or thinking about work, and realized how much he'd missed. Not just events and milestones, but the daily texture of his daughter's life. The way she got excited about specific facts, the way she still pronounced aluminum wrong, the way she looked at him like he was capable of being the father she deserved instead of just the one she'd gotten stuck with. When he dropped her off at home that evening, the nanny pulled him aside. "I don't know what happened in Luxembourg," she said, "but whatever it was, keep doing it. She's happier than I've seen her in months." "I'm trying." "Good. She needs you to keep trying." Damien drove to his penthouse apartment and found it exactly as empty and museum-like as he'd left it. Expensive furniture, expensive art, expensive everything except actual warmth, or life, or evidence that a human being lived there instead of just a very successful corporation. He stood in the middle of his living room and made a decision. The next morning, he called a realtor about selling the penthouse and finding something smaller, warmer, actually appropriate for raising a child instead of impressing investors. Then he called his lawyers about restructuring his holdings so he could step back from active management and focus on being present instead of perpetually busy. And then he called Evelyn because he wanted to tell someone who would understand what it felt like to burn down a life that didn't fit anymore and try to build something better from the ashes. She answered on the third ring, her voice slightly breathless. "This better be important. I'm in the middle of authenticating a collection for Victor and the seller is being difficult about documentation. I'm selling my penthouse and restructuring my entire life." A pause. "Okay, that's reasonably important. Give me 5 minutes." He heard her excuse herself from whatever meeting she was in, then the sound of a door closing. "All right," she said. "Start from the beginning." Damien told her about the planetarium and Sophie's questions, and the realization that he'd been living in a space designed for someone he didn't want to be anymore. "I'm 42 years old and I just figured out that my apartment doesn't have any books because I stopped reading for pleasure 15 years ago." What kind of person does that? The kind who convinced himself that success meant sacrificing everything enjoyable for everything profitable. That sounds like something a therapist would say. I started seeing one last week. Turns out running away from your family and hiding your identity for 2 years creates some emotional issues that probably need professional help. She laughed. "Who knew?" "How's it going?" "Terrifying and helpful in equal measure. She keeps asking me questions I don't want to answer, and then I answer them anyway and feel slightly less broken afterward. A pause. You should try it. Therapy, I mean. Not running away and hiding. You've already done enough running. I'll think about it. Think hard. Sophie deserves a father who's actually dealt with his issues instead of just throwing money at them. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too busy being an asshole to notice. He laughed despite himself. Fair point. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Her foundation work, his conversation with Sophie about Voyager, the fact that they were both completely unmoored from the lives they'd been living and had no idea what came next. It felt good. Normal. Like talking to someone who actually knew him instead of just the version he performed for boards and investors. I have to get back to this authentication, Evelyn said eventually. But Damien? I'm proud of you. For actually showing up for your daughter, for selling the monument to your own loneliness, for trying to be better instead of just wishing you were. I'm proud of you too, for testifying, for standing up to your father, for building something that matters. We're a mess. We really are. But at least we're a mess that's trying. After they hung up, Damien spent the rest of the day sorting through his apartment and realizing how little of it he actually wanted to keep. The art could go to auction, the furniture to estate sales, most of his clothes to charity. What remained would fit in something modest and livable and actually appropriate for having a 6-year-old stay over on weekends. His phone buzzed constantly. Richards wanting to discuss the CEO transition, board members asking for exit interviews, Marcus sending increasingly frantic messages about legal obligations and shareholder expectations. Damien ignored most of it and instead pulled up house listings in neighborhoods with good schools and parks, and the kind of community where people knew their neighbors' names. Okay, what does presence look like? I don't know. Being there, paying attention? Those are actions, not definitions. What does it feel like when you're actually present with Sophie, instead of just physically in the same room? Damien thought about the planetarium, about learning together, about her small hand in his while they looked at exhibits. It feels like I'm not performing, he said slowly. Like I can just be her dad instead of trying to be someone impressive or successful or worthy of respect. Like it's okay not to have all the answers, as long as I'm willing to figure them out with her. Good. That's actual insight. Hold on to that. It was slow work, learning to be present. Damien still caught himself checking his phone during conversations, still had to actively fight the urge to fill every quiet moment with productivity. But Sophie helped, mostly by calling him out when he drifted. Daddy, you're not listening. I am. You're listening with your ears but not your brain. There's a difference. She was right, of course. 6-year-olds were terrifyingly perceptive. Meanwhile, Evelyn's foundation grew faster than either of them had anticipated. Victor's consulting work brought credibility and funding. Museums started reaching out for authentication services. Researchers began applying for grants. Within 3 months, she'd hired a small staff and moved into actual office space instead of working from her studio apartment. She called Damien one evening in late August, her voice filled with barely contained excitement. We just funded our first major restoration project, a collection of 19th century works from a small Brazilian museum that couldn't afford proper conservation. We're sending experts, providing resources, training their staff. She paused. This is actually working. The foundation is doing real good in the world. I never doubted it would. I did, constantly. I kept waiting for it to fall apart, or for my father to somehow sabotage it, or for me to wake up and realize I'd been fooling myself about being capable of running something this big. But none of that happened. None of that happened. Instead, I built something that matters, and people are taking me seriously, and I haven't had to hide or run or pretend to be someone I'm not. Her voice wavered slightly. It's terrifying how good it feels. That's not terrifying. That's just what success actually feels like when it's built on something real instead of just ambition and fear. When did you get so wise? I have an excellent therapist who charges an unreasonable amount to tell me things I should have figured out on my own. She laughed. I like this version of you better than the asshole billionaire I met in that restaurant. Me too. They talked for another hour, trading stories about their respective transformations. Damien told her about Sophie's latest school project and his ongoing attempts to cook meals that didn't come from delivery services. Evelyn shared updates about the foundation and her continued therapy and the fact that she'd finally gotten proper certification to work openly under her real name without fear. My father hasn't contacted me since the agreement, she admitted. Part of me keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to find some loophole or technicality that lets him force me back into his vision of what I should be. And if he does, then I'll fight him again. But this time I won't be alone, and I won't be scared, and I'll know exactly what I'm fighting for instead of just what I'm running from. The trial date arrived in early October. Damien flew to Luxembourg 2 days early and met Evelyn at a hotel near the courthouse. She looked exhausted and wired simultaneously, the kind of tired that came from weeks of preparation and anticipation. "I've gone over my testimony 100 times, she said over coffee that neither of them were really drinking. Rousseau's team has prepped me for every possible question Alexander's lawyers might ask. I know this material backward and forward, and I'm still terrified I'm going to mess it up." "You won't. You can't know that." "I can, actually, because I watched you authenticate an entire stolen collection while hiding your identity and negotiating with your father and building a foundation from scratch. If you can do all that, you can handle a few hostile lawyers." She smiled weakly. "They're very expensive hostile lawyers." "Still just lawyers. You've dealt with worse." The trial started on a gray October morning with the kind of procedural formality that made courtrooms feel like theaters performing justice rather than actually dispensing it. Alexandre Moreau sat at the defense table looking dignified and aggrieved, the picture of a man wrongly accused by overzealous prosecutors. Evelyn was called to testify on the second day. Damien sat in the gallery, close enough that she could see him if she needed a friendly face. She walked to the witness stand with careful composure, answered the preliminary questions with professional precision, and then began explaining the authentication process in language that was technical enough to be credible but accessible enough for the jury to follow. The prosecution led her through each painting methodically: brush techniques, pigment analysis, historical documentation. She was flawless, authoritative without being condescending, confident without seeming arrogant. Then Alexander's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, and the tone shifted. "Miss Hart," he began, his voice smooth and vaguely accusatory, "isn't it true that you abandoned your academic career 2 years ago under somewhat mysterious circumstances?" "I took a personal sabbatical. A sabbatical that involved changing your name, hiding your location, and working as a waitress in Chicago. I wanted privacy. Or you wanted to escape scrutiny about your professional credibility." He smiled thinly. "Tell me, how many authentication reports have you published since your disappearance?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "None under my legal name. I've been working under a pseudonym." "How convenient. So we're supposed to trust the expertise of someone who's been hiding from professional accountability for 2 years. The prosecutor objected, the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Doubt had been introduced. Alexander's lawyer continued. "Isn't it also true that your father, one of Luxembourg's most prominent art collectors, was business partners with my client before a falling out that you were intimately aware of?" "My father and Mr. Moreau had professional disagreements. I wasn't involved in their business relationship. But you knew about the conflict. You knew there was bad blood between them. And yet you expect this court to believe your testimony is completely objective?" "My testimony is based on decades of academic study and expertise that has nothing to do with my father's business relationships." "Or," the lawyer said, "your testimony is influenced by family loyalty and a desire to punish my client for slights against your father's interests." Evelyn's hands gripped the witness stand. "That's not true." "Isn't it? You disappeared from your family for 2 years, then conveniently resurfaced just in time to provide testimony that destroys my client's reputation and advances your father's interests. That seems remarkably convenient." "I resurfaced because Detective Rousseau's investigation required an expert who could authenticate. An expert who happens to be the daughter of the alleged victim. An expert who has every personal reason to want my client convicted." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Miss Hart, did your father ask you to testify?" "No." "Did he offer you anything in exchange for your cooperation?" "No." "Did he threaten you in any way?" "No. My father and I have an agreement that respects my professional independence. An agreement reached after you'd already begun working with prosecutors. How fortunate for the case against my client." The lawyer continued hammering at her credibility for another 20 minutes, suggesting she was biased, unreliable, motivated by family politics rather than professional integrity. Evelyn held her ground, answering each question with careful precision, but Damien could see the toll it was taking. When she was finally excused, she walked past the defense table with her head high and her hands steady. But the moment she reached the hallway outside the courtroom, she collapsed against the wall. Damien was there immediately. "You did great." "I looked biased and defensive." "You looked honest. There's a difference." His lawyer made me sound like I'm testifying out of family loyalty rather than professional expertise. "The jury's going to think I'm compromised. The jury is going to think you're a brilliant expert who was honest about your complicated relationship with your father instead of pretending it doesn't exist." He guided her to a bench. Credibility isn't about being perfect. It's about being truthful even when the truth is messy. She took a shaky breath. "I hate this. I hate being questioned and doubted and having my entire life dissected like evidence." "I know, but you did what you came here to do. You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask." The trial continued for another week. Financial experts testified about Alexander's shell companies and fraudulent documentation. Art historians corroborated Evelyn's authentication methods. The prosecution built a case that was thorough, detailed, and damning. Alexander's defense argued that everything was a misunderstanding, that documentation gaps were the fault of previous owners, that their client was a respected dealer being persecuted by vindictive competitors. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned with a verdict, Evelyn gripped Damien's hand so hard his fingers went numb. "Guilty," the foreman said, "on all counts." Alexander Moreau showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but his lawyers immediately began discussing appeals. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks out and dismissed the court. Outside, Evelyn stood on the courthouse steps breathing cold October air, like she'd been underwater for weeks. "It's over," she said. "It's over," Damien agreed. Alexander was convicted. "The paintings will be returned to my father. Justice was actually served. You served it. Your testimony, your expertise, your willingness to surface despite everything it cost you." She turned to look at him. "I couldn't have done it without you, without someone believing I was brave enough to fight instead of just scared enough to keep running. You were always brave enough. You just needed someone to remind you." They stood on the courthouse steps watching Luxembourg City move around them. People going to work, tourists taking photographs, life continuing despite the small drama that had just concluded inside. Evelyn's phone buzzed. Her father's number. She stared at it for a long moment, then answered. "Father." "Evelyn." His voice was careful, controlled. "I watched the verdict announcement. Your testimony was remarkable. Professional, credible, exactly what was needed." "Thank you." "I wanted to say that I'm proud of you, for your courage in testifying, for the foundation you've built, for becoming someone of substance and integrity, despite my attempts to force you into a predetermined mold." He paused. "I was wrong. About the arranged marriage, about trying to control your future, about believing my vision for your life was more important than your own. I'm sorry." Evelyn's eyes went bright. "You've never apologized to me before." "I know. That was also wrong." Another pause. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to return to Luxembourg or resume any relationship with me, but I wanted you to know that I see what you've accomplished, and I recognize that you were right to leave. You've built something better than anything I could have planned for you." "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. I just needed you to hear it." Her father's voice gentled. "Be well, Evelyn. Continue doing the important work you've started, and know that despite everything, I'm proud to be your father, even if I don't deserve to be." The call ended. Evelyn stood holding her phone, tears streaming down her face. "He apologized," she said wonderingly. "My father actually apologized, and meant it." "That's good, right?" "It's terrifying and confusing, and I don't know how to feel about it." She wiped her eyes. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need to know how to feel about everything immediately. Maybe some things just need time." They walked through Luxembourg City one last time before heading to the airport. The streets were familiar from childhood for Evelyn, foreign and beautiful for Damien. They stopped at a cafe where she'd apparently spent hours as a teenager reading philosophy and pretending to be someone else. I used to sit at that corner table, she said, pointing, and imagine what my life would be like if I wasn't born into the family I was born into. If I could just be a normal person with normal problems instead of someone's heir and investment and carefully planned future. And now? Now I'm a normal person with normal problems who happens to run a multi-million-dollar foundation and testifies in international art theft cases. She smiled. So I guess I got what I wanted, just not how I expected. Is it better than you imagined? It's messier, more complicated. Nothing like the clean fantasy I had sitting in this cafe at 16. She looked at him. But it's real, it's mine, and I chose it instead of having it chosen for me. That makes it better even when it's hard. They finished their coffee and headed to the airport, and on the plane back to Chicago, Evelyn fell asleep against the window while Damien thought about transformation and courage and the strange paths that led people to become who they were always meant to be. 6 months later, the foundation had expanded to 3 countries and funded 12 major projects. Sophie had won second place in her school science fair with a project about exoplanets that Damien had helped her research during their weekly planetarium visits. And Damien had successfully spent 6 consecutive months prioritizing his daughter over work without the world ending or his identity collapsing. Evelyn invited them both to the foundation's first annual gala, a fundraiser celebrating their work and raising money for future projects. Sophie wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself and asked approximately 800 questions about art restoration on the drive over. The event was beautiful in an understated way. Good food, better wine, speeches that were actually interesting rather than just professionally obligatory. Evelyn stood at the podium looking confident and professional, explaining the foundation's mission with the kind of passion that made people reach for their checkbooks. 2 years ago, she said, I was hiding from my own expertise because I was afraid of being found. Today, I'm standing in front of you asking you to support work that preserves culture, supports overlooked researchers, and ensures that art belongs to everyone rather than just those wealthy enough to lock it away. She paused. This foundation exists because someone believed I was brave enough to stop hiding and actually do something that mattered, and because I finally believed it myself. After the speeches ended, Sophie dragged Evelyn over to see the restoration photographs on display. This painting was almost destroyed? Sophie asked, pointing at before and after images. It was stored improperly for decades, but we sent experts to clean it, repair the damage, and now it's in a museum where people can see it. Evelyn knelt down to Sophie's level. That's what we do here. We save beautiful things that were being forgotten. Like how Daddy saved you from being a waitress? Evelyn laughed. Sort of. Though I think I saved myself. Your dad just helped me believe I could do it. He's good at that now. He wasn't before, but he got better. Sophie's assessment was delivered with the brutal honesty that only children could manage. Are you and Daddy going to get married? Both adults froze. Sophie, Damien said, we're not, because Ms. Rachel says when grown-ups spend a lot of time together and smile when they talk on the phone, it usually means they like each other. Sophie looked between them. And you smile a lot when you talk to Evelyn. We're friends, Evelyn said gently. Very good friends who helped each other during difficult times. But that's different from the kind of relationship you're thinking about. Oh, Sophie processed this. That's okay. I like having her as a friend too. Can we get more cheese from that table over there? She bounded off toward the appetizers, leaving Damien and Evelyn in awkward silence. Sorry about that, Damien said. She's been on a mission to organize my entire life since I started actually being present for it. She's wonderful. Brilliant and honest and exactly what you needed to become a better person. Yeah, he smiled. She really is. They stood watching Sophie charm cheese cubes away from the catering staff, and Evelyn said quietly, She's not entirely wrong, you know. About what? About the smiling when we talk. She looked at him. I do like you, Damien. Not in a we should get married way, but in a you fundamentally changed my life and I'm grateful way. In a you're one of maybe 3 people who actually knows who I am way. I like you too, in all those same complicated ways that don't fit neatly into traditional categories. Good. Let's keep being friends who helped each other become better versions of themselves and leave it at that. Agreed. Sophie returned with cheese and questions about whether stars eventually die and what happens to the art when museums close. Evelyn answered with the same careful enthusiasm she brought to everything, and Damien watched his daughter and the woman who'd accidentally saved him from himself and felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness exactly, more like peace, the quiet satisfaction of having faced difficult things and survived them and become someone better in the process. The gala ended late. Damien drove Sophie home through Chicago streets, listening to her chatter about the art and the food, and how Evelyn was the coolest adult she'd ever met, except for him and Miss Rachel. At home, he read her a story about astronauts and adventure, tucked her in, and sat on the edge of her bed like he'd done every night for 6 months. "Daddy?" she said sleepily. "Are you happy now?" "Yeah, baby girl, I really am." "Good. You're better when you're happy, less grumpy." "I'll try to stay less grumpy." "Okay," she yawned. "I love you." "I love you too. More than all the stars we looked at." "That's a lot of stars." "It really is." She fell asleep holding her stuffed telescope, and Damien sat there for a while longer, thinking about the past year and everything that had changed. He'd lost a CEO position and gained actual presence. He'd walked away from billions and found purpose. He'd stopped performing success and started building something real. It wasn't perfect. He still messed up, still struggled with being present, still caught himself falling into old patterns of using work to avoid emotions. But he was trying. Actually trying, not just saying he'd try and then prioritizing everything else. His phone buzzed. "Evelyn, thank you for coming tonight, and thank your daughter for the best question of the evening. Nobody's ever asked me if art restoration makes the paintings lonely before. She has a gift for asking the questions nobody expects. Like father, like daughter. She got her perceptiveness from somewhere. Pretty sure she got it from her mother. I just provide funding and moral support. You provide more than that. You provide presence. That's worth more than funding. Trying to, anyway. You're succeeding. Keep it up." Damien set down his phone and looked around the house he'd chosen specifically because it felt like a home instead of a monument to his own success. Books on shelves, Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, photos from their planetarium trips instead of expensive art meant to impress visitors. It was smaller than the penthouse, less impressive, exactly what he needed. His laptop sat on his kitchen table, unopened for 3 days. There were probably emails from his former board, investment opportunities, requests for his time and money and expertise. All of it could wait, would wait, because he'd finally figured out what mattered, and it wasn't quarterly returns or acquisition strategies or building empires that nobody actually needed. What mattered was sitting on the edge of his daughter's bed, listening to her breathe in sleep. What mattered was having friends who knew him as a person instead of just a net worth. What mattered was doing work that made the world slightly better instead of just making him slightly richer. It had taken a shy waitress with a hidden past and a talent for calling him on his failures to teach him that. It had taken losing a billion-dollar deal to realize that some things were worth more than money. It had taken his daughter's simple question, "Why are you always mean to people?" to make him examine who he'd become and decide to be someone different. The transformation wasn't complete. Probably would never be complete. People didn't change overnight from arrogant billionaires into selfless paragons. But they could change gradually, imperfectly, one decision at a time. They could choose presence over productivity, vulnerability over performance, real connection over carefully curated relationships built on mutual advantage. They could look at a woman serving their table and see an actual person instead of invisible labor. They could admit when they were wrong. They could walk away from deals that compromised their values. They could show up for their children even when work felt easier than emotions. They could, in other words, become better versions of themselves. Not perfect, not transformed into entirely different people, just better than they'd been, more honest about their failures, more willing to try despite being terrified of messing it up. Damien cleaned up the kitchen, set the coffee maker for morning, and headed to bed. Tomorrow he'd take Sophie to the park, help her with homework, maybe call Evelyn about potential consulting work that would actually interest him instead of just pay him, build a life that felt meaningful instead of just successful. It was unglamorous work, building a better life. There were no dramatic revelations, no moments of perfect clarity where everything suddenly made sense, just daily choices to be present instead of distant, to be honest instead of performing, to value people for who they were instead of what they could provide. But unglamorous work was still important work. maybe the most important work there was. And for the first time in years, Damien Laurent felt like he was finally doing something that actually mattered. Not building an empire, not closing deals, not accumulating wealth or power or influence that would outlive him, just being a father to his daughter, a friend to someone who needed one, a person trying to be better than he'd been. It wasn't the story he'd planned to write with his life, but it was turning out better than anything he could have planned. And sometimes that was exactly enough.